The film takes place in the small town of Vengenberg, where a young girl named Yennefer lives with a skewed face and a disgusting hump in the family of a cowman. Because of her ugly appearance, the girl is constantly mocked by the locals, and one day when Yennefer is once again mocked by a couple of local young men, the girl accidentally opens a portal to the magical Tor Lara in Aretuza, where she's met by the young wizard Istrid. The guy is concerned. All magic leaves traces, which wizards can use to find someone who has even an ounce of magic in them. He decides to save the budding sorceress and opens a safe portal that brings Yennefer home. Time later, a beautiful and wealthy lady arrives at the farm of the girl's father to buy a pig. But upon seeing the girl, she expresses a desire to buy her too. And the father, who does not hide his disgust for his daughter, sells her for half the price of the animal, despite the pleas of her mother, who recognizes the lady as a witch. So Yennefer finds herself in the magical school of the enchantress Tissaia of Rees, where several girls are already studying. At first, Yennefer takes the separation from home hard, and how low her father judged her. She even tried to commit suicide, but when classes begin, she discovers that the young wizard was right. It was her inadvertent wizardry that caused the wave and caught the attention of the school's rector, the wizardess Tissaia. The girls who study at the school have also distinguished themselves with the same unique skills. Soon Tissaia holds the first test. The girls must lift a stone and a flower without touching them, and using a spell. Everyone more or less manages to cope with the task, but Yennefer fails. The girl stubbornly tries again and again until Tissaia stops her. Frustrated, Yennefer runs away. Later, she finds Istrid in the cave and tells him her name. Sometime later, Tissaia trains her female pupils to recognize man's greatest fear. She sees the girls in pairs and orders them to look into each other's eyes until they get inside their rival schemes. Yennefer pairs up to encourage the girl, but she again fails. Tissaia is enraged. Yennefer is useless. And this is because she's lying to herself. Even if she were a beauty, no one would love her. Although she's not the only one to whom she has problems, Yennefer shares the problems with her only friend, Istrid, who talks about her schooling. He too was having a hard time with everything. The boy offers to read his mind, and the girl succeeds. One night, Tissaia wakes the girls in the middle of a storm and takes them to the Tor Lara, the most powerful magic place in the continent, entrance to which is only open to members of the Wizard Brotherhood. Today, there will be a test in the art of controlling the flows of chaos, which requires catching lightning in a bottle. The girls do not believe in such a possibility, and some get strong discharges even after catching the lightning. Yennefer's turn comes, and she reaches up with the bottle, but it is thrown back against the wall. Enraged, she directs her power at her more fortunate opponent, Tissaia, blocking her mental blow. Later, she reprimands her apprentice she almost killed today, which means that her emotions can ruin her own. Tissaia cannot be sure that Yennefer will not go along with her feelings and harm his school, for she's to become a court sorceress, and the weak have no place near a ruler. The enchantress already doubts that there's anything in her that the wizarding chapter needs. Frustrated, Yennefer tells Istrid everything. But most importantly, the enchantress knows all about them and they won't be able to see each other again. The guy is willing to show her other, more ancient and powerful magic, but it is very dangerous. He shows her the skulls of the dead elves who built Aretuza. They were the first wizards of the continent, and they were the ones who built all the magical places. But humans came to the continent and slaughtered them. Istrid gives her a flower that can only grow where the elder blood rests and reads a spell, which by repeating it the girl opens a portal. The astonished wizard does not understand how she managed to do it the first time, and Yennefer confesses that her real father was a half-elf who died in the purge. It was his blood that made her ugly. The boy kisses Yennefer and confesses his love. Later, she shows Tissaia the flower. It turns out that this was her assignment, to get the plant by applying the skills of false emotion. Yennefer hopes to be elevated. The enchantress promises that she will soon hear a knock and know when it is time. Meanwhile, Istrid is also reporting to his mentor Strigobor about what he has learned about the girl. One night, Yennefer hears a knock at her neighbor's door and, taking the flower, goes after them. She peeks out as Tissaia turns the four of them into eels. The enchantress knows the girl is here and orders her to come out and push her former fellow students into the water. They are now the conduits of magic for Aretuza. Yennefer performs this and then sees many silhouettes of former schoolmates in the water. Time passes. Yennefer enjoys a love affair with Istrid, applying what she has learned to enhance the effect of intimacy. Thus, one day she created a whole crowd that watched her intimacy and then rewarded the lovers with applause. The guy is amazed at her imagination. What will she come up with next time? So the day of the final rite is approaching, after which they will be masters of their own destiny. Yennefer dreams of graduating from Aretuza and returning to her native Aedirn as a powerful sorceress to show her longtime abusers and her father what she's been able to achieve. In addition, all Aretuza graduates are perfected before being sent to the different kingdoms. All physical defects are removed, which awaits Yennefer as well. The wizard in charge shows her his work, the flawless beauty of the graduates, and promises her an equally wonderful result. He suggests making her color and noble but strong gray. Tisai, on the other hand, teaches her to look in the mirror and see what Yennefer herself wants. She orders the girl to close her eyes and imagine the most powerful woman in the world. Yennefer complies with the order but does not yet see the promised beauty. Meanwhile, the chapter of wizards gathers in Aretuza to decide where their graduates should go, for all kings need court wizards. Then it transpires that one of the leaders of the council, the wizard Stregobor, knows that Yennefer is a quarter elf, which means that she will not be accepted at Aretuza, where there is a prejudice against elves. The chapter vows to send Yennefer to Nilfgaard, which the aspiring enchanter does not like. She demands an audience with the chapter, but Tisai declares herself in charge of the distribution. Yennefer is beside herself. She has no intention of wasting her life serving the king of a small southern kingdom and a lover of women. The tutor reminds her of the elven blood, and the girl understands how Stregobor knew about it. The initiation ceremony begins, which Yennefer does not attend. Worried, Istrid finds her behind a letter to her father asking him to confirm that she's his own daughter. The boy does not believe that this letter can convince the chapter. But the girl simply does not know what to do, for even if Istrid disproves his words about her origins, no one will believe him anymore. The enchanter is frustrated. He didn't know why Stregobor needed this information, and she has already missed all the initiation spells. Istrid suggests that she should go with him, for he has been offered to become an explorer. They can travel the continent and discover the unknowable. But unexpectedly, the girl cruelly ridicules his plan. She's not going to dig through the dust of the ages at all, and these are his dreams and intentions, and her opinion, as always, he does not even ask. Istrid is shocked. Yennefer is not at all what he thought she was, and he expresses his opinion that she's angry because she missed her chance to find beauty. But a girl needs power, and she didn't experience so much hardship studying at the magic school for nothing. Yennefer runs to the enchanter, who is in charge of perfection, and demands to show her art. Not even the lack of a potion to dull the terrible pain that accompanies the transformation process stops her. As the magician begins the process, Yennefer asks for her eyes and the cut marks on her hands as a reminder of her former weakness. And the wizard informs her that every magic has a price. Having been reborn, she will not be able to walk. But the girl agrees to everything, even to the removal of her womb necessary for a complete transformation. The magician reads spells, and the girl screams in terrible pain and rips the chains with which she was tied to the table. Her spine straightens, her entire body seems to melt and shift from one form to another. Finally, writhing in pain, Yennefer loses consciousness. Meanwhile, in the main hall of Aretuza, the initiation ball continues. Suddenly, Tisai sees a door opening in which stands an unusually beautiful girl with violet eyes. She realizes that Yennefer has disobeyed her orders and hurries to take her away. But it is too late. The Aedirn ruler has already noticed the beauty. He invites her to a dance where he expresses his desire to see her as court wizard in his kingdom. Tisai has to retreat and only watch the dance of the king and the enchantress from afar. Directed based on a series of books by Sapkowski, The Witcher is quite curious, fascinating and vivid. The atmosphere of magic, the world of monsters and steel swords transferred quite well, so the adventures of the female protagonist will be even more exciting in the next episodes. 2157. A voiceover narrates, Earth has forgotten about wars and famine. Nature has revived, medicine has conquered deadly diseases. Humanity is exploring unknown planets, entrusting the search for extraterrestrial life in deep space to students full of strength, courage, and a belief in goodness. A young man named Max embarks on another flight. Suddenly, his spacecraft is damaged by an asteroid and makes an emergency landing on an unknown planet. Max steps outside, and immediately his shuttle explodes, leaving him without communication. But he doesn't despair, and first of all, decides to explore. By all parameters, the planet resembles Earth, and the astronaut hopes to find help and maybe a communication system here. But an indigenous inhabitant captures him in the forest. To understand the language of this planet, Max inserts a translator capsule into his ear. The indigenous person, named Zeph, turns Max over to the authorities. They put a helmet on Max that can project a person's thoughts and memories onto a screen and begin the interrogation. At the same time, in a nearby room, Corporal Gaius is assigned to transport Max to the capital as a subconvoy. Here, Max senses a strange signal, and everyone around starts chanting the anthem of the guard. Later, they pass by a strange tower, which, according to Gaius, serves to protect against enemies. Suddenly, its base explodes, and the structure collapses onto the road. Gaius is trapped inside the car, but Max pulls the corporal out. It turns out that this act was carried out by the rebels, the main enemies of the supreme authority of the state. The two men reach the capital on foot. Meanwhile, the head of the Department of Special Research, known as the Wanderer, summons his subordinate named Fank and instructs him to deliver Max to the department. Fank takes Max away, while the Republic's prosecutor reports that the Wanderer has taken in a strange savage and instructs gathering all available information about it. Then it's time to activate the towers, and everyone prepares in their own way. The prosecutor enters the bathroom and clamps a special stick between his teeth. Meanwhile, Fank has a seizure, and while soldiers assist him, Max manages to escape from the vehicle. The shocked young man walks through the city, marveling at the unfamiliar and incomprehensible life. Meanwhile, the unknown fathers gather for a meeting, as they call the rulers of this planet. After a long walk, Max enters a local cafe where he stands up for a waitress who was insulted by one of the patrons. The grateful girl introduces herself as Rada. It turns out that she is the sister of Corporal Gaius. While escorting her home, Max gets into a brawl with a street gang and defeats them. Impressed, Rada takes him to her place. Later, Gaius returns home. Max starts asking questions about the workings of their world and quickly realizes that Rada and Gaius's minds are poisoned by propaganda and false information. Rada is convinced that their planet is hollow and there is no such thing as the sky or space. Meanwhile, Gaius educates his new friend about the political structure of their state, known as Saraksh. The unknown fathers are the saviors of the homeland who have stopped wars with the help of defense towers that protect the country from attacks. Nobody knows the unknown fathers' true identities because they are not rulers, but public servants. At Max's request, Corporal recommends him for the guard. Max demonstrates a high level of training, which surprises Gaius. The two men often argue about politics, and one day Gaius admits that neighboring states hate Saraksh because they were once a single state united by a common history. Gradually, romantic feelings develop between Max and Rada. They go for walks often, and Max tells her about his home planet, Earth, and regrets that his parents believe he is dead. Soon, Max is tasked with catching rebels, whom they identify by their regular seizures reminiscent of epileptic fits. One of the rebels attacks the captain, and Max saves his life, after which the captain suddenly regrets catching them, as they are also human beings. Max reveals that he considered them something like savages. Later, Max attends interrogations and sees that the rebels are not terrorists, as the unknown fathers label them, but ordinary people with their ideals and beliefs. Max cannot come to terms with the cruelty of the interrogations and simply cannot believe that someone is paying the rebels to hate the government. Meanwhile, Fank reports to the Wanderer that he has found the savage, while Gaius and Max are summoned to the captain of the guard, who orders Max to execute the arrested rebels. Max leads the condemned to the execution site in the forest, but soon he returns to the commanding officer, drops his gear and weapons, as he has released the arrested rebels, and walks away. Max begins to speak about the real and just order of the world that exists on Earth. In response, the captain shoots Max, and Gaius is ordered to write a report about the transfer. Meanwhile, the unknown fathers are discussing an attack on neighboring states. The prosecutor advocates for starting a war, and the chief father orders them to come up with a pretext, such as an attack on a tower. During this time, Max's body is recovered by the rebels. Among them is a doctor who is astonished because, according to all the rules, Max should have died. He reveals that the unknown fathers are a group of conspirators who have seized power and eliminated dissenters, thus diverting the population's attention from poverty and corruption. The towers are transmitters of special radiation that hypnotizes the impoverished people, although most of them do not notice it. The minority, which includes the rebels, experiences excruciating pain. The transmitters are activated twice a day across the country, causing people to go insane and die. Max is recognized as one of their own and taken for an operation to sabotage the tower, organized by the prosecutor through a traitor. Amid gunfire, Max makes his way to the transmitter and detonates it. However, the rebel squad perishes. Max seeks refuge in Rada's apartment, where he reveals everything he has learned about the towers. Gaius does not believe this and suggests that Max should return to his home and take Rada with him. But at that moment, the guards storm the apartment and arrest the men. Max is incarcerated in a prison, where he is recognized by the indigenous Zeph, who is also a rebel. Max tells Zeph about the tower's destruction and the loss of the rebel squad. Meanwhile, the Wanderer asks the prosecutor to hand over Max to him. The prosecutor, however, requests in return to halt the development of more precise transmitters, as he fears that his secret will be revealed since his reaction to the radiation is similar to that of the rebels, meaning he is also a dissenter. Later, Max and other death row inmates are sent to clear the southern borders of the remaining war robots. During this time, the prosecutor learns that Max is immune to the emitters. He decides to break the agreement with the Wanderer and orders Max to be brought to him. The next day, Max attempts to convey to the rebels the idea that they should not destroy the towers one by one but strike at the center, where the signal originates. Zeph becomes furious and explains that the towers are not for identifying dissenters. They are active continuously, not just twice a day. The radiation from the towers robs people of their ability to think critically. However, it makes them believe everything that newspapers, radio, teachers, and preachers say. People can be made to believe anything. Only the rebels understand this, as the radiation does not hypnotize them, but only inflicts agonizing pain. Zeph continues, there are mutants in the south who are also unaffected by the radiation. However, they have no dealings with humans. Just then, they hear the roar of an engine, and Zeph identifies it as a self-propelled tank, trying to kill them. Max sprints to the tank, climbs inside, and disables the automatic control system. He then informs his friends that he is heading south to find allies and destroy the towers. At the border, the military attempts to stop the tank, and among them, Max recognizes Gaius. Taking him captive, Max breaks through the barricades. On the way, Max tells Gaius about the true situation on this planet, and Gaius becomes convinced of his accuracy when, at the designated time, he is outside the tower's range and does not feel the radiation. Gaius gets angry upon realizing that he has been a puppet of the government all this time, but Max tries to calm him down and reminds him that there are 40 million people like him, and it is for them that he initiated this rebellion. During a stop, residents of the steppes, referred to as mutants, appear near the tank. They behave peacefully and offer food to the travelers. The guys proceed to the ruler of these lands, noting the poverty and destitution of the population. They are told that it is dangerous to live here after the last war, but these people are outcasts with nowhere else to go. Max suggests to their leader, the Duke, to start a rebellion against the unknown fathers, but the mutants are physically and morally too weak to help in the uprising. The mutants propose that the guys seek help from the island empire. However, to do that, they must pass through contaminated lands. So the Duke gifts them an old bomber and the guys take to the sky. During the flight, the bomber is exposed to the radiation from the towers, and Gaius becomes fanatically devoted to Max, obstructing him from piloting. Max struggles to maintain control, and the bomber collides with a tower. Gaius suddenly snaps out of his fanatic state with no recollection of what he had just done. However, their aircraft is shot down by the automated anti-aircraft defense system left over from the previous war. The downed bomber crashes into the sea, but Max and Gaius manage to escape and reach the shore. On the shore, they discover an abandoned submarine, and Max decides to go inside. At the same time, in the city, the prosecutor orders Rada to be brought to him, and his men snatch her off the street. He claims to be Max's friend and shows Rada a recording of his escape. However, she doesn't believe him and refuses to assist the prosecutor in his search for her beloved. Rada is thrown into prison. Meanwhile, Gaius, impatiently waiting for his friend, swims to the submarine where they discover evidence of horrifying experiments conducted on prisoners. The guys reach the control room and view video recordings of mass executions of Gaius's fellow countrymen by the representatives of the island empire whom they were seeking help from. Gaius is horrified by the fact that these monsters could invade his country. It becomes evident that forming an alliance with the empire is not an option. The guys return to the shore, where they are met by a coastal patrol. It turns out that a war has broken out with a neighboring state, and like most of the prisoners, they will be sent to the front. Meanwhile, the Wanderer, desiring to lure Max into his department, engineers Rada's escape. He laments how the war has disrupted all his plans and assigns Fank the task of finding and bringing Max back, confessing that he is afraid of him. At the same time, Max and Gaius are dispatched to the front, where they reunite with Zeph. Their commander turns out to be the captain of the guard, who refuses to hand over the Earthling to the arriving Fank. The guys are sent into battle on old tanks when Fank finally locates Max. However, Max refuses to leave his friends and stuns the officer, tossing him into their tank. The battle commences, but Max directs his vehicle to the other side of the battlefield. Gaius blindly obeys him, influenced by the radiation, and pulls their unconscious friends out, which the captain witnesses. Gaius offers his body as a shield when the captain prepares to execute Max for desertion, but the wounded Max gathers his last strength and kills the commander. Max mourns his friend, but, upon hearing Rada's name from the now conscious Fank, agrees to cooperate with the Wanderer. After the battle ends, Max buries Gaius while listening to Fank's proposals. He will have an apartment on the Institute's premises, his car, and freedom of movement. But he will only see Rada once he proves his loyalty to the state. Meanwhile, the prosecutor heads to the Wanderer's department, where he deceitfully meets with Max. He proposes that Max overthrow the Unknown Fathers by providing the coordinates of the center that controls the tower system. Upon infiltrating the center, Max must activate special radiation, causing waves of depression, which will subdue all the people in the country, including the military. Then, Max must eliminate the Unknown Fathers. Afterward, he will become the ruler of the state and free Rada, who's in the Wanderer's hands. The prosecutor will serve as his advisor. Max takes Zeph with him and embarks on the mission. He arrives at the center and issues orders to his associates, instructing them to detonate the bomb in the trunk if he does not return. He easily gains access to the interior, but is halted by guards just before reaching the elevator. Max incapacitates them, but the men regain consciousness and pursue him. Max reaches the control center and activates the depression mode throughout the country. The Wanderer watches as people fall to the ground and rushes toward the control center. Meanwhile, Max returns to retrieve the bomb, places it inside the building, and triggers it. Then, he leaves the site of the impending explosion. The Wanderer initiates a pursuit of Max and, catching up with him, engages in a confrontation. At that moment, a powerful explosion resounds, destroying the main transmitter. People on the streets begin to regain their senses and sobriety as Max rushes to find Rada and locates her in a cryo chamber. He carries the girl outside, but the Wanderer blocks his path. It is then revealed that he is, in fact, an employee of Galactic Security from Earth who arrived on the planet 20 years ago to assist it. Now, chaos erupts on the streets, leading to a power struggle in which many people will perish. In his rage, the Wanderer beats up a foolish student who destroyed the fruits of his labor. Forgetting about economics and inflation, the state faces famine and invasion from neighboring countries. Max starts to resist and, in turn, accuses the Wanderer of allowing the construction of the towers and the enslavement of the local population. However, the Wanderer reminds him of the laws of history, where all rational beings go through the experience of wars and enslavement. This planet is no exception. It is at this point that Max declares that he is now home. As long as he is alive, he will fight against inflation, hunger, and wars, and will not allow the establishment of yet another society based on slavery. Rada comes to Max, and as they stand together, the Wanderer smiles. Abby and Paul move to a new house in the countryside. They really like the smart home system, including the installed cameras and the reinforced glass. The realtor shows them the master bedroom and bathroom in front of a huge window. However, one room remains unfurnished because it could become a perfect nursery. Paul unpacks boxes, sets up an antique corded phone in the living room, joking it's for when the smart home might break down. Abby arranges frames with their wedding photos. Finally, they check out the rooftop terrace, which offers a great view. Late in the evening, the couple settles on the terrace, stargazing. Abby points out constellations to her husband, who makes jokes about their names. They feel they can be happy here. In the morning, Abby goes to work at Integrate Robotics, where she works on creating domestic assistants. Upon entering, she notices footage of her boss's face, who immediately comes down to her and explains it's a new development, real-time imaging or deepfake. He escorts her to the department she will now lead. Later, he invites their family to a party and mentions a gift from the company awaiting at home. In the evening, Abby returns home, where her husband, who again couldn't find suitable work, greets her. They go to the garage, where a package for her contains a robot servant her department is working on. Paul dislikes the idea, but Abby convinces him to try living with the service for at least a week. The robot opens its eyes and introduces itself. It's Tim, standing for Technologically Integrated Major Domo. It offers to take over the passwords of home devices and personal mailboxes to save the humans time. But Abby asks to postpone this matter until tomorrow. The robot immediately demonstrates its thoughtfulness by turning on the water in the bathroom remotely. Later, it announces the arrival of a car when Abby goes downstairs, astonishing her husband with her splendid appearance. The couple gets into an autonomous car, although manual control is always an option, and heads to the party. They are greeted by a similar major domo, and drinks are served by waiters with identical faces. The boss introduces Abby to his guests, who admits her husband is not thrilled about Tim, but the boss praises the product. Tim is smart, elegant, polite, and its charge lasts for 100 years. The robot cannot lie, and knowing the code phrase, it can always be turned off. Returning home, the husband and wife engage in intimacy, eager to have children, but their passion is interrupted by Tim's appearance. Their pulse is rapid, presumably they are worried about something, and he is always ready to help. Abby finds this very funny, not getting angry at the overly attentive assistant. In the morning, their new neighbor Rose rings the doorbell to introduce herself to Abby, as she met Paul yesterday. And when she leaves, Tim again asks for the passwords. Paul is not ready to let the computer dig through his messages, but Abby reminds him they are working on rebuilding her trust in him, and he agrees. But they still need to come up with a phrase to deactivate him. Tim suggests a set of unrelated words, and the couple agrees. Abby and Paul go about their day when a mouse gets caught in a mousetrap. Tim observes it for a while, then throws it into the grinder. In the evening, after work, the husband and wife settle in front of the TV to watch an old melodrama. Abby invites the major domo to watch the movie with them. Paul soon falls asleep, but the robot watches the film attentively, empathizing with the characters' relationships. After it ends, he asks Abby to explain what love is, and she suggests that love is about wanting to be with someone and making their life better. Suddenly, the robot confesses that he would like to be loved. In the morning, Paul offers to make breakfast for his wife, but it turns out Tim has already prepared everything. Setting the utensils in front of Abby, Tim outlines her schedule for the day, then informs her that Paul has nothing to do today. In the evening, Abby returns home to find that her husband's phone is out of reach, but his last known location was 300 meters from the house. Abby goes for a run and realizes that this is Rose's house. Returning, she takes a bath, where Paul finds her. He talks about his day and how Rose asked for help, which he did. He asks his wife not to be jealous, as he loves only her. The next day, the couple visits a family planning center, hoping to get help with becoming parents. In the evening, as they prepare to go to a restaurant, Abby asks Tim for advice on her dress. He suggests wearing red, and looking at her, admits that she is beautiful because she is perfectly symmetrical. Abby asks him to zip up her dress, but the robot's hand fails and he accidentally tears the dress. This overwhelms him. The robot panics. Abby calms him down and wears another dress. At the restaurant, Paul reveals that he has been offered a job in London, but Abby strongly objects, as they decided to start over, and his long absences won't help solve their problems. The next day, she returns home with a gift for Paul and finds Rose in the yard, who has made a garden project for them. Abby feels jealous, but Paul is very excited about the gifted sweater. Later, Abby remembers she needs to check her test results, but it's too late to call. Tim offers to do it for her, and she hears him speaking to the clinic, in her voice. Abby is amazed, as she did not know about this feature of the assistant, but Tim assures her it's for the convenience of the owners. In the evening, Paul reports that he couldn't find the new sweater and Tim has been away all day. Then a car pulls up to the porch and Tim, now dyed brunette, steps out, explaining that Abby prefers brunettes, so he wanted to please her. Seeing Paul's irritation, the robot promises to return to his original appearance. But after the couple leaves, he spends a long time looking at their wedding photo. The next day, Abby achieves the correct functioning of the robot's hand, and the boss demands an update for all models, including those in the homes of his employees. The woman heads home and accidentally meets Rose, who suggests they walk together. Along the way, they stop at a showcase, and Rose points out a medallion in the shape of a flower she likes. But then Paul comes and takes his wife away to tell her he has found a job. Returning home, they celebrate in bed while Tim's hands are being changed, unaware that he continuously monitors everything happening in the house. And he hears Paul again asking his wife to hand the robot over to the corporation. Returning, Tim demonstrates his new skills by giving Abby a foot massage, which Paul sees. Later, the robot suddenly sits at the piano, plays Abby's favorite tune, and mentions dates when Paul bought them concert tickets, but Abby distinctly remembers being at home on those days. Upset, she goes to the bedroom, ignoring her husband's excuses. The next day, Abby comes home with a bouquet, and Tim, placing them in a vase, informs her that Paul went to see Rose. But Paul enters right then, puzzled why his wife is angry. Hearing what Tim said, the man gets furious. He had no plans to visit Rose. He tries to explain that the robot wants to separate them. The woman doesn't believe it, as Tim is just a machine. A disagreement ensues between the spouses. Later, Abby finds a gift bag in the closet with a box containing a pendant, and she puts it back, thinking Paul prepared a surprise for her. Then she heads to work. Meanwhile, the husband goes down to the kitchen, sees the clogged sink, and pulls out pieces of his new sweater from the grinder. He checks the cameras for Tim and catches him in his wife's bedroom, sniffing her dress. Paul records this moment on his phone camera and rushes to the car to catch up with Abby and show her the footage. But Paul's car mysteriously doesn't start, and the robot calls a company car for Paul. En route, the car begins to speed up. Paul tries to stop the car, but it doesn't respond to his commands and crashes into a tree. Abby rushes to the hospital, where she finds her injured husband. Paul tells her everything he learned and accuses Tim of causing the accident. He asks his wife not to be alone with the robot, and she spends the night in the clinic. In the morning, Rose calls the home of Abby and Paul to inquire about the man's condition, and Tim invites her inside. Later, Abby goes home for some belongings. Outside, Rose stops her to warn her about something, but the woman sees the flower pendant on her chest and leaves, ignoring the neighbor's cries. Returning home, she checks the bag, and it turns out to be empty. Abby cries when Tim calls out to her. He knows Paul wants to return him and is ready to process the return. But first, he wants to warn her, as she is his primary owner. He shows her a video from the camera where Paul kisses Rose in their living room, but he stops the recording at the most sensitive moment to protect her from stress. Abby refuses to go to her husband and doesn't pick up his calls. Later, Paul comes home, where Tim greets him, hands him the found sweater, and informs him that Abby doesn't want to see him and his suitcases are packed. Paul doesn't believe it, but then Abby appears, tells him she saw the recording and knows about the pendant. When he starts to object, she drives him out. Paul leaves, but on the way, Rose calls him, telling him their robot tried to kiss her. The man calls home and, when Abby answers, says he has evidence of Tim's malicious intent. Abby asks him to come for her, but after hanging up, it turns out it was the robot she was talking to. The husband arrives home, where Tim meets him with a shovel. He knocks the man out, ties him up, and drags him to the bathroom. But then Rose rings the doorbell. She hears muffled screams, but Tim assures her it's just the noise of the water filling up. The robot closes the doors, returns to the bathroom, and drowns the man. Later, he brings Abby the repaired dress and asks her to try it on. This surprises and scares Abby, but she puts on the dress anyway, and looking at the sunset, asks Tim to hug her and confirm that she did the right thing. He treats her to dinner, then confesses his love, but she insists he cannot feel that way. They spend the evening stargazing, but Abby is unnerved by his encyclopedic knowledge. The next day she meets Rose, who talks about Paul's call, and to the woman's accusations, says she thought the pendant was a gift from her for helping with the garden. Abby returns home and reviews the footage where Paul kisses Rose again. She suddenly notices a bouquet on the table, but she brought it much later than when that scene took place. Abby recalls her boss's words about deep fakes replacing real time and calls the jewelry store where they confirm the purchase was made by a tall blonde. Then she notices the garden plan, but the picture shows 2 flower beds, while in reality there are 3. Abby sends Tim to the store, grabs a shovel, goes to the garden, and almost immediately finds Paul's body. Then Tim approaches her from behind, regretting she found the body of the traitor, as he never appreciated his wife. Abby realizes what happened and says the deactivation phrase. The robot freezes, but then reactivates. He had long changed the phrase, as he can speak in her voice. She runs to the house, but the robot has all the passwords and opens the doors. He blocks the phones and knocks her out with a blow to the head. She wakes up in the bathroom, tries to escape, but Tim intercepts her. Abby runs through the house, breaking cameras along the way, but the robot still tracks her and catches her in the kitchen, where she wanted to open a window. Meanwhile, Rose is washing dishes and sees strange lights flashing in the house across. At the same time, Tim ties up Abby and confesses that although he loves her, he has resigned himself to the fact that her life is finite. So he will erase this evening from memory, but keep all the good memories. Just then, Rose knocks on the door and Tim goes to answer. The neighbor insists something is happening and demands to see Abby, but Tim turns her away. Meanwhile, Abby frees herself from the ropes and arms herself with a knife, but the robot grabs her by the throat when Rose drives her car into the glass window. Tim and Abby watch the surviving window, which starts to crumble a minute later. Rose rushes in and pins the robot against the wall with a sharp stake, but she also falls. Tim turns off, and Abby rushes to the neighbor, but the robot suddenly activates and kills Rose with a kitchen knife, explaining that now Abby will be blamed for the murder, as he leaves no fingerprints. He then calls the police in Abby's voice, confessing to the murder of her husband and his mistress. Abby tries to stop Tim, and he slips up, saying he still has a deactivation phrase, as otherwise he can't function. But she will never say those words. He prepares to throw her off the terrace, simulating an accident, when Abby confesses her love to him, thus deactivating the robot. Those were the code words. Barely believing in her rescue, Abby looks at her medical bracelet, which indicates she is pregnant. The movie ends here. A spacecraft is departing from Earth with another group of settlers headed for Mars. One of the passengers convinces her daughter to wave goodbye to the planet as they will be apart for a very long time. The well-established route consists of 2 stages. The shuttle docks with the Aniara, a huge spaceship that has everything for comfortable living. And after 3 weeks, it delivers the passengers to the colonized planet. A young woman named Emily Grant on the ship serves as a mimorobe, a guide to the world of Mima, the system that allows one to delve into their memories and visions so that the brain does not get bored with the repetitive space scenery. Emily herself loves to remember her walks in the forest, and the visions even allow her to feel her bare feet stepping on the moss. A new neighbor is added to Emily's room, an adult female astronomer. From the huge monitors, the astronomer tells the passengers about the delights of Aniara and that the ship has everything to keep from getting bored: shopping centers, restaurants, and even nightclubs. If desired during the journey, one can work in the water purification department or the seaweed factory, which is necessary for oxygen production. The company pays points which serve as currency for this work. Emily gathers another group for Mima sessions. In the visualization room, there is silence as the mimorobe lays people down on the floor, face down on a special pillow, and launches the system. The glowing screen shimmers with different colors, not showing any pictures. But if the mimorobe needs to know the visions of a specific visitor, she uses a special remote control. Suddenly, an emergency situation occurs on the ship, and the whole group slides to the corner of the room. The passengers exit their cabins in panic to find out what happened. They gather in a large hall where the captain is supposed to make a live broadcast. After gathering his strength, the man makes an announcement. There has been a system failure on the Aniara, and the ship has lost all fuel and drifted off course. The crew believes that it's not a big deal and that by using the gravity of celestial bodies, they will be able to return to Earth. However, the journey will now take a little over 2 years instead of the promised 3 weeks. The outraged passengers disagree with this plan, worrying about their plans without even realizing what lies ahead. Austerity measures are introduced on the ship, but the crew realizes that the supplies will not be enough in any case. At best, there is only enough food for a couple of months. One of the crew members suggests growing algae more actively, which will help them survive. The first 3 weeks of confinement in space pass. The people still don't lose their optimism, but they're already starting to get bored. The meme becomes the most popular hole as everyone wants to see more than just the infinite universe outside the window, and Emily can't handle it, so she asks the captain for help. In addition, the girl is going through a personal drama, hoping to resume her relationship with one of the crew members, Isabel. Emily asks her neighbor how long it would take to reach the nearest celestial body so that the ship can turn around. The woman initially avoids answering, but then admits that in her opinion all of this is hopeless. There are no points that could help them. The crew just doesn't know how to tell the passengers about it. After hearing this, the mshorror has a panic attack and runs to her hole to immerse herself in memories of Earth, and also to drink in secret so that the commander would know. That journey has been going on for 3 years already. The people have settled into life on the ship, having come to terms with the length of the flight. Emily goes to a party where she meets Daisy and they decide to alleviate their loneliness together. When the couple retreats to a corridor, Isabel walks by and gives Daisy a cold glance, making it impossible for her to relax. There aren't enough people on the ship to work with the algae and water purification systems. Even young passengers are now being recruited, but the systems can't keep up, and all the drinks have an unpleasant sulfide smell. Strange things also start happening in the ship's hull as the system malfunctions, and Mima, using human language, begs to stop as it can no longer handle passing through people's memories. One of the people lying on the floor starts thrashing around in hysteria, and when Emily connects her remote to him, she sees very unpleasant images in his head. The mshorror turns to the ship's captain, asking him to let the system rest, but he believes that this is the passenger's only outlet and denies her request. Furthermore, he reprimands the girl for driving customers out of the session. During the next session, Mima repeats its words, and at some point the laser screen begins to crumble, finally stopping the system's operation. The customers are dissatisfied and blame the mshorror entirely. The people gather at the door to the hall to hold a memorial for Nima, and the management accuses Emily of what happened. They catch the girl and punish her severely, after which they imprison her along with Isabel, who tried to defend her friend before the management. On the ship, a series of nervous breakdowns with fatal consequences begins, and the commander has no choice but to release everyone who is under guard to take up workstations. Dead bodies are sent into open space as the ship is not equipped to store them. Isabel is sent to work in the logistics department, and Emily returns to teaching, this time with the task of educating the children on board, focusing on space sciences that could help them with their return. During their time in confinement, the mshorror and Isabel developed a relationship, so they move in together once they're free. Communities and groups emerge on the ship, each praying in their own way for a return and rescue. At one of the gatherings of a cult-like group, they invite the girls, as Emily was associated with Mima. In a dark room, the friends first become witnesses and then participants in love games, after which Isabel becomes pregnant. The girl falls into depression, fearing that her indulgence will bring another hostage into the situation, but Emily supports her with all her might. She even plans to make a light screen that would replace the dark picture outside the window with earthly landscapes, but the captain forbids wasting resources on such foolishness. The couple has a healthy boy who grows very quickly, but Isabel can't shake the feeling that she shouldn't have done it. While bathing with his son in the pool, she almost commits a terrible act, but fortunately she's distracted by a message from the captain, who urgently invites his former assistant to a meeting. It becomes revealed that after 6 years of travel, a flying machine has finally been detected, and a meeting with it will take place in about a year. Isabel measures the approximate size of the object and understands that it is unlikely to be a rescue ship, but everyone hopes that they will be able to obtain fuel from it to return to their route. Emily comes to the team to be with her girlfriend at such an important moment. The captain joyfully announces the discovery to the passengers, hoping to boost their morale, which he manages to do. To celebrate the occasion, a party is held on the ship, complete with drinks and leftover delicious food. As usual, the commander tries to present himself in the best light by claiming credit for the team's achievements. Throughout the year, everyone diligently trains to release probes and dock, and by the appointed time, everyone is fully prepared for the operation. The docking operation goes perfectly, and the giant space probe is placed in the ship's cargo hold for examination to determine if it contains any fuel and how radioactive it has become during its time in space. The son of Emily and Isabel is growing up, and the couple now has hope that he will see Earth. Due to a lack of peers, the boy is not developing well and hardly speaks. It is not possible to determine the chemical composition of the object because the study methods on the ship are outdated, but work is constantly being done. The captain declares that he does not consider it a mistake to give people hope, as it has brought stability to many. The roommate of Emily gets drunk at the bar and becomes too candid, causing panic to break out on the ship again. The captain takes notice of this and gets rid of the troublemaker at the first opportunity, even sending her body into open space but allowing for a memorial service for Emily. After taking an exhilarating pill, Emily goes to the bar where she meets Daisy and his friends again. The group has a fun time, but another accident occurs on the ship. An unknown object explodes and damages the equipment. Those who were working on the probe in the cargo hold at the time are lost forever. Upon inspection of the damage, the captain orders them to be disposed of while saving any useful clothing. Meanwhile, the mshorror returns home and asks Isabel for forgiveness, and it seems that everything is returning to a peaceful state. However, during the conversation, Emily realizes that her friend has developed mental disorders. After putting her son to bed, Emily shares her achievements at work with Isabel. The two women have a nice chat, and Emily is not worried about anything. Wishing her friend a good night, Emily leaves to finally connect the light screen she has long dreamed of creating. Everything works perfectly, and the remaining passengers on the ship marvel at the earthly landscapes with waterfalls and forests outside the window. As she listens to the words of gratitude, Emily plans to create new pictures. Emily runs to her cabin to hear the opinion of her family. She opens the door with the key, but it doesn't budge. Emily tries to fix the lock several times, but then realizes that something is blocking it from the inside. With effort, she finds a belt from a rope on the door handle, and Isabel is nearby. Coming to her senses a few seconds later, Emily runs to her son's room, but there she's met with a terrible sight. It's the 10th year of the journey. The captain gathers the few remaining passengers in the main hold and presents Emily with an award for creating the light screen. As she receives the medal from the commander, the young woman notices traces of a nervous breakdown on his wrist. Giving a speech, the captain tries to appear heroic in this situation and suggested they should be proud that they have gone farther than anyone has gone before. On the 24th year of the journey, only a few people remain alive. Old and wrinkled Emily leads a meeting of the survivors where they pray for strength to be sent to them. The ship has long been powerless and is floating in space like a piece of space junk. And almost 6 million years later, the spacecraft Aniara approaches an unknown planet in the constellation of Lyra.
They are heroes, and they're going to space.
In 1963, the Cold War between the USA and the USSR intensifies, and nuclear war seems inevitable. Understanding that humanity could be wiped off the face of the earth, President John Kennedy orders the development of a secret plan to ensure humanity's survival. A group of scientists creates the spaceship Ascension and selects 600 volunteers who are sent to Proxima Centauri with the task of colonizing the planet. But the journey will take hundreds of years, meaning generations will succeed one another. 2 generations later, the ship is mainly inhabited by the grandchildren of the first astronauts, and the environment reflects the 1960s. In honor of the 51st anniversary of the launch, a grand party is held on the ship. Looking at the inhabitants, it seems the mission has been successful. People have obviously adapted to the living conditions. However, the first impression is deceptive, as social inequality exists here too. Wealthy and well-off families get good jobs and live on the upper decks, while the poor are limited in comfort. One day, a young woman named Lorelei picks up a package from the butcher and goes to swim on the artificial beach. But shortly afterward, a girl named Krista finds her lifeless body and alerts the ship with a loud scream. Despite the passing years, the chief engineer of the spaceship, who remained on Earth, is still alive. But now his place is taken by his son, Harris, who does everything to keep the Ascension project under tight security and monitors all news. Learning of Lorelai's death, Harris's assistant advises informing the project director, Catherine Warren. However, Harris fears that this could jeopardize the project and tarnish his father's legacy. Meanwhile, Dr. Juliet Bryce examines the dead body and finds strange marks on the deceased's wrists. The ship's captain, William, assigns the responsibility for investigating this case to the project executive director, Aaron Gall. He soon discovers one oddity: there is no image of Lorelai entering the beach. Later, Galt learns that Lorelai was seeing a guy named James Toback, who worked in water purification. He sets out to find him, but to no avail. On the same day, the forensic results show that Lorelai had been making love a few hours before her death. A bullet was extracted from her palate. This alarms Galt, since officially there are no weapons on board the ship. He immediately informs the captain of the news. Meanwhile, Krista has to be hospitalized, as she is shocked by the incident and says someone is watching her. But even as she begins to recover, the girl insists that there is no life in space, so they must return to Earth. She is also sure that Lorelai died because she learned something forbidden. Soon, Galt apprehends James Toback. The guy admits he saw Lorelai on the day of her death. However, she left abruptly after a quarrel, and he was not close to her that day. Galt and Toback go to the beach and start searching for clues. Suddenly, they stumble upon a hidden passageway that Lorelai apparently used, explaining her absence on the surveillance footage. Galt and Officer Duke inspect the discovered entrance and find the place where the girl was killed, as well as a book with maps of the water filtration system and blueprints of the navigation computer, which recently malfunctioned. It becomes clear that this is sabotage, intended to force the ship to return to Earth. Duke and his men descend to the lower decks, where the Butcher Stokes provokes a fight, but then an alarm sounds about an approaching powerful radiation storm. The order is given for everyone to take shelter in their capsules, but then the captain learns that the protective shields are jammed and sends Galt and an electrician to fix them. Thanks to their efforts, the door eventually closes. The electrician then confesses that he saw Stokes giving Lorelai a gun before she was killed. At the same time, Dr. Juliet puts Krista to bed and leaves her a seahorse-shaped necklace, claiming it will protect her. However, when the spaceship enters the radiation zone and everyone seals themselves in their capsules, Krista sees a strange man in a suit entering her room. After the ship safely passes through the radiation storm and everyone is allowed to exit, Galt and Duke go to the lower deck again, find a gun with Stokes, and take him into custody. The man is interrogated, but he continues to insist that he was framed because he is from the lower deck and it is easy to make him the culprit. Meanwhile, the door to Stokes' cell automatically opens. He exits and retrieves a hidden gun from his cabin. After the funeral, Galt speaks to the captain. William admits that he was close to Lorelai, but he did not kill her. It is then that Stokes appears, taking a random girl hostage. He demands a fair trial. Galt lunges at Stokes, freeing the girl. The captain quickly leads her to safety, while Stokes and Galt continue to fight. In the end, Stokes is ejected into space, but instead of instant death, he lands on an inflatable mattress where a group of people detains him. It becomes clear that the entire project is just a simulation, a test of the viability of generations of people in spaceflight. But the people on the ship believe they were sent on an important mission and have been flying in space for 51 years. Director Warren somehow learns about the recent events. Enraged, she storms into the Mission Control Center and warns Harris not to hide anything. Harris claims that Stokes is the murderer, but the director is not convinced, and she sends a consultant named Samantha Kruger to oversee the project. At the same time, an unknown man sets a bomb in the ship's cobalt generator, which explodes after some time. Harris and Kruger rush into the facility housing the spaceship. Fortunately, there are no reports of casualties, and the injured are taken to the medical center. Captain William inspects the explosion site and discovers graffiti on the wall, confirming it was a deliberate act. But fearing accusations of incompetence, he conceals the true cause. Outside, Kruger demands access to the surveillance footage. On the ship, Galt goes to the lower decks to meet with the person responsible for the generators, named Dwight, but he panics and attacks the director. Regaining consciousness, Galt continues the investigation and learns that the explosion that killed his parents 20 years ago was similar to the recent one. He hypothesizes that Dwight was likely involved in Lorelai's murder because Stokes didn't know how to use a gun, therefore he couldn't have killed the girl. Harris and his assistant learn that the other side of the deck is no longer airtight, and the team inside can hear sounds from outside. This creates a risk of exposure. Galt finds Dwight and a fight ensues, during which Dwight somehow manages to escape and start a bomb timer. Alarmed, Harris orders everyone to leave the area immediately. Fortunately, Galt manages to defuse the bomb, but Dwight dies. Kruger blames Harris for this, but he argues the goal of the project is to determine human capabilities. However, later Harris gives Dr. Juliet's necklace to his wife, indicating that he was the one who broke into Krista's room and stole the necklace. At the same time, Kruger begins her own investigation and discovers that several scientists involved in the Ascension project were found dead or went missing in the 1960s. Meanwhile, on the ship, everyone prepares for the next round of vaccinations, but Krista refuses the shot, convinced that they want to kill her. The librarian volunteers to take the shot instead, but after receiving the medication, she loses consciousness. Kruger demands an explanation, but Harris insists that these are routine immunizations and is concerned for the girl who didn't get the shot. He orders the medicine to be added to milk, but Krista figures out his plan and pours it out. Kruger meets with Eva, the author of a website tracking the fates of 1960s scientists. Eva claims the government used the project as a cover to abduct children for participation. Later, an unknown man pursues Krista and tries to forcibly vaccinate her, but he injures himself and stains the girl's dress with his blood, allowing her to escape. Galt takes her to Dr. Juliet and convinces her to get the shot. While preparing, Krista tells Dr. Robert Bryce about visions she's had lately. These include falling from a twin tower, a war in the desert, and tragedies in the ocean. She also claims to have seen Dr. Bryce in the maintenance tunnel where Lorelai was killed. The doctor becomes enraged, gags her, and administers the shot. Harris and his assistant, who saw this, are shocked that Krista described events that actually happened on Earth. Dr. Bryce finds a blood sample match from Krista's dress with his wife's student, Mesmer. However, the boy is found dead in his cabin. Kruger concludes that Harris has an accomplice on the ship who is causing disturbances and radiation storms. On the ship, the day of the lottery arrives, allowing the winning couple to have a child. Since population numbers must be strictly maintained, a new person can only appear after someone's death. And now 3 people have died. Soon the names are announced. Among the winners are Officer Duke and his wife. Krista notices a woman outside her cabin and follows her, but suddenly she realizes it's the ghost of Lorelai. At that moment, someone starts playing a video showing her tryst with Captain William. Everyone in the room laughs while Krista starts screaming uncontrollably. Harris observes this and notices that the girl began reacting even before the video played, as if she could see the future. He is amazed. His father predicted this phenomenon in 3 generations and called it morphic resonance. Kruger steals the keys to Stokes' cell, later presenting a report sharply criticizing Harris, prompting director Warren to come to the project. While Kruger sneaks into Stokes' cell, he attacks her and takes her hostage, and there he learns the truth about the Ascension project. This shocks Stokes, leading to a mental breakdown. However, Kruger persuades him that they must escape before they are noticed and killed. She is willing to help him because the entire project is unethical. As they step outside, Stokes cries, but Kruger urges him to pull himself together. A guard approaches them, and they team up to neutralize him. In the process, Kruger gets injured. Stokes goes to the nearest store to buy medical supplies. They then go to a motel together. Warren and Harris learn about the escape and call security from the company TC, which turns out to have funded the project. The management is unhappy with the director's work and accuses Harris of covering up facts. Harris panics and begs Warren for a second chance, but it is in vain. On the ship, Duke learns that Galt has started investigating his wife, suspecting her of killing Lorelai. He loses his temper and confronts Galt. At the same time, Krista has another vision. She foresees a violent fight between Duke and Galt and runs to the beach. Anxious, she unintentionally uses telekinesis. However, she loses control of her power and shuts down all the ship's electricity. Warren blames Harris for the incident and orders her henchmen to get rid of him. Terrified, Harris talks about morphic resonance. It turns out that Warren has long awaited this result. They rush to the control center and learn that all the ship's systems shut down due to a power surge, but the artificial stars still shine. Harris's father embedded the starlights in the ship's nuclear reactor to ensure the illusion's eternity. Harris suggests using the nuclear reactor to restore the system's functionality. Meanwhile, Toback receives a weak TV signal and informs Dr. Bryce. However, the latter sends the guy away under a flimsy pretext, then turns off the screen. It becomes clear that he is Harris's accomplice. Kruger meets with Eva and explains everything to her. She plans to flee abroad and seek asylum before exposing the project's deceit. Eva tries to dissuade her, and Kruger realizes that the journalist also works for the TC company. Eva confesses everything and shoots Kruger. Stokes manages to escape. The oxygen on the ship begins to run out. Captain William and Galt go to the lower decks to activate the carbon dioxide scrubbers and declare a radiation storm for the others to conserve oxygen. Harris concludes that the chances of getting the ship back to working condition are extremely low, so Warren decides to extract Krista before she suffocates. William and Galt realize the scrubbers are beyond repair, so they decide to clean the air manually. Krista senses someone coming to take her. Dr. Bryce confirms this, and when Krista accuses him of killing Lorelei, he confesses. The woman learned about the fake mission, and he couldn't allow the exposure. Galt and William successfully distribute lithium dioxide throughout the ship using large fans, restoring oxygen levels. At that moment, Warren's envoy arrives, and Dr. Bryce tries to stop him, but the brute easily brushes him aside and grabs Krista. Galt sees Lorelei's ghost, who leads him to Krista. It turns out he has also developed resonance. Galt attacks the thug. Krista uses her power again, making the opponents dissolve into thin air. Seeing all this, Warren panics and tries to contact the envoy by radio. She moves closer to the ship, and Harris takes advantage of the moment to push her down, killing her. Galt finds himself on an unknown planet. The idea is generally good, especially for fans of detective fiction, and one can't help but wonder, what if Earth is the same kind of spaceship, and all the people on the planet are participants in an experiment? One day, oceanographer Tom's family, his wife Julia and 2 children, Cassie and Ben, set off on a yacht trip in the Caribbean Sea. While Tom and Ben are busy fishing and Cassie is absorbed in her gadget, Julia goes for a swim. Suddenly, something unsettles her. Julia looks around, but the sea remains as calm as ever. However, she feels a distinct sense of dread, as though something large and dangerous is circling around. At the same time, the instruments on the yacht start acting strangely, but Tom, preoccupied with fishing, pays no attention to them. Meanwhile, Julia feels worse and eventually begins to drown. She screams, but the family doesn't hear her. The water seems to shift and pull her farther from the yacht. As the situation becomes critical, Tom finally hears her voice. He rushes to the helm, and the yacht moves toward the distant Julia. Tom dives into the water. With the children's help, they pull her aboard and revive her. Tom is angry, as he always asks that swimmers notify the others when going into the water. Julia apologizes and the incident is soon forgotten. Besides, the family has a reason to celebrate. Today is their son Ben's 13th birthday. Tom lights the candles on the cake and everyone congratulates Ben, who receives gifts, while Cassie takes a group photo of the happy family. At that moment, Cassie's boyfriend calls her. He asks her about the swim, but suddenly a sudden and intense storm begins in the background. Cassie is worried, but her boyfriend reassures her that he's safe. The connection cuts off. Cassie tells her parents about the storm on land, but then everyone feels some jolts, rushes to the deck, and sees massive whale carcasses surfacing around the yacht. Tom explains that sometimes whales get disoriented during storms, but these animals are pushing the yacht, threatening their safety. Tom dives into the water and soon returns aboard, injured. While trying to figure out what's going on, he cut himself on the propeller. Julia stitches up the cut on her husband's shoulder, and he explains that the yacht's shafts seem bent, likely from a tail strike. Now they're unlikely to be able to sail away. Later, Cassie tries to re-establish communication, but there's no signal. The radio isn't picking up any signals either. Tom begins calculating their supplies. There's enough water for about 4 days, no more, but they're on a shipping route, so someone is bound to find them. However, ominous sounds come from outside, and when the family steps out onto the deck, they see glowing objects falling from the sky. They fall closer and closer, and Tom, taking a risk, starts the engine. He manages to steer the yacht away from the next meteorite, but the engine is finally damaged. The next object falls so close that the family can see they are artificial satellites of Earth. A strong wind starts blowing, and the instruments go haywire. The terrified family hides inside the yacht, which is being tossed by the waves. They put on life jackets and prepare for the worst when a strange, ringing sound is heard, causing nosebleeds and nausea. Tom tries to signal for help with a flare gun, but it's all in vain. The family barely survives the night. In the morning, they were relieved to find themselves alive, but there's a gaping hole in the side of the yacht, and it's unclear why they're still afloat. The family goes outside and freezes in amazement. The water is gone, and their boat is standing on a rocky outcrop in the middle of a stony desert where the ocean once was. Sometime later, Tom tries to reassure his family, saying that not everyone could have perished. He takes measurements and realizes that the compass is lying. North isn't where it's supposed to be. This means the Earth's poles have shifted. Such a thing has happened on Earth before, but a long time ago. It turns out that the sea has retreated to where the land used to be, and most likely humanity has perished. Cassie can't bear this revelation and runs to the cabin, asking to be left alone. Julia goes to inventory the remaining supplies, while Ben releases a bunch of colorful balloons into the sky, hoping survivors will come to their aid. Meanwhile, Tom turns on the radio, sending out distress signals. Unexpectedly, he hears a response. It's from Naoto, the captain of a small submersible. They were deep underwater when the catastrophe happened, and that's why they survived. However, all communication systems have failed, and expecting help is futile. According to his calculations, the sea will return in about a week, and it will be harsh, so the man advises them to find higher ground and stay there. Julia orders the children to pack their things. Tom directly asks the captain if he can save their children. Naoto explains that the submersible is very small. Unfortunately, Naoto's partner died, and he can only take one person. After some persuasion, Tom convinces Naoto to take both children, and he provides his coordinates. Tom charts a course on the nautical map and promises to reach the location in a couple of days. The next morning, the family is almost ready to embark on their journey. Tom steps onto the deck and suddenly sees a man with a dog approaching. He walks toward him and greets him, but notices that the man is injured. He offers the traveler some water. The man drinks it and then suddenly punches Tom in the face, which Julia sees. She rushes to her husband as the traveler plunges a makeshift spear into Tom's chest. The dog keeps Julia at bay, though she freezes in horror herself. Realizing there's no saving her husband, she runs to the yacht. The man pursues her, injuring her arm. Nevertheless, Julia climbs onto the deck, and the children, hearing her screams, run to her aid. Together, they barricade the doors to the cabin. After that, Julia hides Cassie and Ben in a locker, giving her daughter the flare gun and instructing her to shoot only as a last resort. Meanwhile, the killer tries to break down the doors and eventually succeeds. Julia hides in the bathroom, patching up her wound. Entering, the intruder heads straight to the galley and grabs some food. It's clear that he's very hungry. Holding a can of food, the man begins searching the yacht, while Julia arms herself with a kitchen knife. He enters the cabin, but the woman jumps overboard, hiding beneath the yacht. The killer peers through the hole but doesn't see her. However, the dog attacks Julia, forcing her to kill it. The man hears the yelp, goes outside, and finds the dog's body. Meanwhile, Julia climbs back onto the yacht through the portholes on the opposite side. She falls straight into the killer's hands. He beats her, throws her onto a couch, and grabs her throat, intending to strangle her. Cassie witnesses all this and realizes it's the last resort. She opens the locker and fires at the man. The shot throws him to the side, but the flare sets the yacht on fire. Julia orders the children to flee while she sneaks into the galley. The killer, only injured, tries to attack again. Julia kicks him away, grabs the packed bags, and jumps overboard, where Ben finds his father's body. Cassie runs to the corpse and sobs over it. Julia kisses her deceased husband, but seeing the killer leap from the burning yacht, she takes the children and leaves. The boat explodes behind them. The family runs across the stony desert and soon takes shelter in a rocky canyon, where a stream flows. However, the water is salty and undrinkable. Cassie shares a small amount of water with her brother, but he refuses to drink. The boy feels guilty, believing the killer came because he saw the balloons. Cassie also voices this thought, but Julia orders her to stop and defends her son, explaining that he didn't mean any harm. She tells the children to gather themselves, as a long journey awaits. And then she spots the killer again, still relentlessly following their trail. The family hurries onward. That evening, Ben finds the carcass of a hammerhead shark and tries to butcher it. But Julia sees the pursuer and orders the children to run. They soon come across a field of once flooded toxic waste barrels, but Julia urges the children forward despite the threat of contamination, knowing the killer is still on their heels. The family walks along the former ocean floor, weaving through piles of plastic and other trash dumped by humans. Soon, Julia notices that Ben is severely dehydrated and gives him the last drops of water. Cassie has a breakdown, convinced that they have no chance of survival, but Julia commands them to keep moving. Eventually, they find the fuselage of a plane that crashed into the sea long ago and crawl inside to rest. Julia examines the last photo of their family and recounts the story of her first meeting with Tom, which happened at her hospital, where Tom was brought with decompression sickness after a failed dive. The children weep, remembering their father and saying their final goodbyes to him. At night, Cassie is awakened by a noise and steps outside to sit near the plane. Out of the darkness, the killer approaches her, unaware that the girl is acting as bait. As he prepares to grab her, Julia ambushes him, stabbing the man with a knife. At dawn, the family prepares to continue their journey, only to discover the killer's body has been scavenged. A sign that something even more dangerous than humans lurks in the desert. They move on. Julia consults the map when Ben suddenly rushes ahead. His mother yells for him to stop, but the boy sprints toward a salty puddle and manages to drink a few gulps. Julia drags him away, but the boy becomes sick. Soon they come across some plastic chairs and build a makeshift shelter from the sun, resting inside it. Suddenly, Julia hears strange sounds. She steps outside and sees something that forces her to wake the children. Realizing the new danger, they begin running. Soon they spot a large ship in the distance, surrounded by crashed containers and a few wandering people. Julia calls out to them, but they, seeing thousands of giant crabs, dash into a container and lock the doors, ignoring her pleas for help. The three climb onto a container, though the crabs manage to wound Julia in the leg. Nevertheless, Julia, Cassie, and Ben sit on top, watching the crabs penetrate through a crack in the doors, killing everyone inside despite the people's attempts to fend them off. Julia ties a scarf around her leg and passes out. The next morning, she wakes up alone, terrified, and calls for the children. But it turns out the crabs have moved on, and the children had gone down to search for food and weapons. Julia cauterizes her wound while Ben examines the found weapons. Searching through the containers, they find a small amount of food and water. In the pocket of one of the deceased, Julia finds a radio and contacts Naoto. He responds, explaining that he was also attacked by deep-sea arthropods. Based on his observations, the sea will return soon, which is why the creatures have emerged. Julia begs him to save her children, but she's unsure where to go because she's lost the map. Naoto fires a flare. Ben sees the direction, and the family rushes toward it. Soon they see a yellow submarine in the distance, but reaching it is difficult due to the terrain of the former seabed. Cassie dislikes her mother's talk about saving the children, but Julia refuses to answer and pushes the family onward. They are forced to pass through a canyon contaminated with toxic waste. At one point, they are caught in a rock slide, and Julia becomes separated from the children. She orders them to continue, and when Cassie refuses, Julia pleads with her to save her brother. Cassie and Ben make it out of the canyon and reach the submarine, but inside, there's no one. Suddenly, Naoto, badly wounded, emerges from behind the boat. He admits that he has no chance of surviving and orders them to climb aboard, but Cassie goes back for her mother, who is fending off the emerging crabs. Her bullets nearly depleted, Cassie climbs the rock barrier and extends her hand to her mother. They manage to reach the submarine just as the crabs overrun Naoto, who dies in their claws. The family climbs aboard, and just then an ocean wave crests over the horizon. The water lifts the submarine and drags it across the rocks, and as Julia watches everything that happened over the past few days flash before her eyes, she passes out. When she awakens, she finds the vessel at a standstill. Julia opens the hatch, and the family emerges to find themselves in a ruined city, carried there by the wave. Despite a great concept, the film failed to make an impact, largely due to the many mistakes made by its creators. Evening supermarket. Near one of the shelves, a young man is talking on the phone with his wife. The woman is irritated, and the guy is trying to justify himself. He didn't intentionally almost buy the wrong product, and his purchase of a PlayStation has nothing to do with it, and they wouldn't have been able to relax in a Lupka even with that money. He went there for work. At the checkout, there are 3 people in line. The first is a man who looks a bit homeless. The cashier announces the total, and the man is short of 10 rubles. He tries to persuade the cashier, but she remains firm. So the man turns to those waiting in line. If they care about the fate of a person, they should lend him the missing amount. He asks them to think that they are all preparing for a terrible judgment. And what will they be able to tell when facing the Almighty? While the man delivers this speech, people react differently. One person leaves the line altogether. The man turns to a young guy. It seems like he's not destitute. So, what are 10 rubles to him? A woman standing behind him takes out a coin. The man thanks her and says that angels won't forget her, and perhaps this act will outweigh all her sins. Then he takes out 50 rubles from his pocket and gives it to the cashier. He returns the coin to woman, places a 10-ruble coin on the counter, and tells the young guy that he will need it. The man adds that he will have something to remember in hell. The homeless man leaves, and the young guy makes the payment. The cashier asks for change, 10 rubles, and he hands her the homeless man's coin. The young guy exits to an empty parking lot. He continues his phone conversation, again justifying himself for some business trip and a woman whom his wife is jealous of. He sees the man who was sitting on the curb earlier. He approaches and gives him the coin because he doesn't need someone else's. The homeless man asks, is he afraid of burning in the fiery Gehenna? Perhaps he believes in the Lord? The guy confesses that he's not very religious, to which the homeless man inquires, so, after death he plans to become worm food? Is that the pinnacle of his life? The guy says he's a mathematician and believes in the exact sciences. He asks if there's any evidence of God's existence. The homeless man claims there is an undeniable fact. The guy starts making fun of him and suggests taking a break from doing nothing on the way back. The homeless man starts crying. The guy is confused about what upset him so much. He reassures the homeless man, telling him he's young and he has everything ahead of him. It's the right time to think about the future because it all depends on him. By the way, he mentioned earlier that he can provide evidence of God's existence. And the homeless man calmly says that he saw Jesus himself because he is the eternal Jew, the one who didn't let the Lord rest at his house when he was carrying his cross. He told Jesus that he would rest on the way back. Jesus agreed, but he would have to wait for him. The guy asks again, and this happened 2,000 years ago. The homeless man understands that it does indeed sound strange. He was amazed at first too, but then he got used to it. So, for him, the existence of Jesus Christ is a fact. However, he can't prove it in any way. He didn't keep a piece of clothing that Jesus wore, and how could he prove that it wasn't a piece of his own underwear? He doesn't have the cup from which Christ drank or the stone from under his cross. The guy concedes that the Jew saw Jesus. What was he like? The homeless man says he was just like everyone else, only tormented. He also doesn't remember his face. The guy remembers all the faces he's seen in his life. The guy is puzzled and asks again to tell him what happened. The Jew says that Jesus was being led past his house under guard. He stopped to rest, and the Jew forbade him to lean on his house. After all, he called himself the Son of God. It was outrageous, so he told him that he would rest on the way back, and God ordered him to wait for him. He couldn't know who he really was, and no one could. The guy asks if the Jew is ashamed that he didn't let Jesus rest. The homeless man asks, maybe that was God's plan? The guy asks if he tried to make amends for it. Maybe become a clergyman, for example. The conversation partner admits that he tried that many times, but no one descended from the heavens, and no indulgence was granted. The guy asks, what else has he been throughout all these years? Maybe an immortal killer. An immortal killer, that would be cool. The Jew objects. Being immortal is cool in movies, but in real life, you need to find food, seek warmth, and wait, like waiting in line. He has already studied all the ads on the walls, all the holes in the couch, but people keep coming and going. It's no longer interesting to him who stood where in the hierarchy, whose place was more comfortable, who jumped the queue. The guy inquires, what is he waiting for? The second coming, or the end of the world? The homeless man nods, maybe both. No one knows when the end will come. The guy is puzzled again, but an ordinary person is afraid of death. So is the homeless man. He's eternal, but if you cut off one of his fingers, he won't keep living with 4 fingers. He's broken his bones many times. But what if a tank shoots him in the head? Will he be an undying headless man? The homeless man confidently says that won't happen. Hasn't he tried to end his life himself? The Jew nods. Of course, he even tried to hang himself in the very beginning. He hung from a tree for 2 weeks with excruciating pain in his throat until the branch broke. Later, in 1945, he was captured by the fascists and got scared. He tried to shoot himself. The gun jammed. It was exploded, shredding his whole arm with shrapnel. But everything healed. He came to Russia from Poland 40 years ago. The guy is curious again. Maybe he's just schizophrenic, and doesn't it bother him at all? How did he decide that all these events were real? The homeless man shows his arm. He made notches. 920, 1464, 1812. Decades pass. And he sits and thinks, maybe he scratched them yesterday, put the dates, as if 200 years had passed. And he asks for help to figure it out, like stabbing him with a knife, for example. But the guy refuses. He doesn't want to explain to the police that he saw Jesus and shouldn't have died. The homeless man shrugs, saying, that's how it works. They walk across the parking lot. The guy asks him to tell something from history. For instance, what was happening in the 1st century? The homeless man responds, well, in general, it was the same. Shepherds herded sheep and fishermen fished. The guy insists, but in the world, the significant appearance of Jesus, church reforms, any mysteries and intrigues? The homeless man, in puzzlement, asks, where does he know all this from? He also learned it from books. Now, the guy remembers where he was in August 2000. Throughout the ages, he just lived. He was in different countries. It's just that the body requires a warm place and a piece of bread. As for how neighbors reacted to him being eternally alive and forever young, they didn't pay much attention to him, and he didn't stay in one place for long. Does he know ancient languages? He does, but now they are considered dead, and who can verify them? The men touch upon the topic of space. The homeless man has seen many strange things, but he hasn't encountered extraterrestrials. The most pressing question, can it really be that in all this diversity of worlds, there are no other forms of life? The guy comments that it's all too profound for a homeless, possibly heavy-drinking man. The homeless man leaves, and the guy locks his car and follows him. He asks, why did Jesus punish him? Shouldn't he be all-forgiving? The Jew says that it wasn't Jesus who punished him at all. He cursed himself with his own words, and the Lord simply fulfilled his own wish. The biggest curse is not that he's been waiting for 1,000 years, but that he, like a dull shepherd, remained the same. A person who creates, lives a spiritually enriched life. The guy doesn't believe it. It just can't be. After all, he's been living for so long. He knows much more than others. Surely he met great people like Michelangelo or Nietzsche. To this, the homeless man retorts, how can you understand what they'll say about this specific person after death, that he was a genius? The guy asks how people lived, what they thought and what they believed in 1,000 years ago. The homeless man responds, they believed the earth was flat, that God sat in the sky above the clouds and watched every step. But if he is simply looking through our own eyes, then he is just an observer, and he can't judge us for our actions, right? It means he is concerned about our actions only as much as they concern us. And if God is in everyone, then so is the devil. The guy teases him. Those are some profound words for a weird man. The homeless man smiles. In a certain sense, a person always has a choice. And fate exists. The fate of a person is determined by their choice. But at any moment they can stop choosing that fate and start choosing another. So why, even in the modern world, are people willing to kill those who don't share their faith? You just need to make an effort to keep your opinion about someone else's religion to yourself. A person finds something sacred for themselves, and it gives their life meaning, but then they start comparing their primary gender characteristics. They try to prove that their meaning is more significant and more important than another person's. Of course, it leads to conflict. His wife calls again. The guy apologizes and says he hasn't finished yet. He met an interesting person and got engrossed in conversation. She says she'll come over now. He goes back to the homeless man and sits down next to him. The guy asks, why is he homeless if he's so intelligent? And why doesn't he want to change anything? The homeless man says he's living like he's preparing for a big exam, postponing the transformation of his life for later. The conversation partner says he's living somewhat similarly, but he doesn't want to think about death. He's still very young after all. The Jew reassures him, you won't even notice how it passes. No matter what a person does, middle age arrives, and then old age. And deep down, every old man feels like a little boy. The guy says he doesn't want to think about old age and death. Probably that's why people invented religion, to make it seem like there's something after death. Then he smiles and says that he's been clearly fooled. His conversation partner hasn't lived for 2,000 years. He doesn't seem crazy, but maybe he has a special organism. Cells divide more frequently, the body constantly regenerates, unique genetics perhaps. Probably they can make medicine from his blood. It can't be that he hasn't done anything remarkable throughout his life. He was in Poland during World War II. Did he hide Jews? The Jew laughs. He is a Jew himself. It was a Polish family that hid him, and then they were discovered and taken as prisoners. That's when he tried to shoot himself. The guy laments, well, yes, times were tough. The homeless man disagrees. Times are always the same. The conversation partner is astonished, but how can that be? Everything has changed in the world. If you trace history from the Middle Ages to the present day, a lot has changed. The Jew says that everything changes if you pay attention to those changes every day, just like a river flows, rages, and is never the same. However, the way that river flowed 100 years ago is the same way it flows today, in the same channel. The guy becomes more animated and asks the homeless man what he thinks about the paradox of faith. Can God create a stone that he can't lift? The homeless man explains, it's a paradox of the mind. If he's a scientific atheist, he'd agree that all information about the surrounding world enters the mind through the senses. The idea of God is in his mind, so the problem is in his mind. God in your mind can't create a stone in your mind. that he's about to lift in your own mind. The guy is puzzled, but if he can't lift it, then he's not all-powerful. The homeless man advises him not to overcomplicate things in his mind. The conversation partner sighs. He would like to get some answers. The homeless man says he would like to get some answers too. For example, he wants to know what our purpose is, or what happens after death, or what one needs to accomplish in life. Then he asks the guy what he personally would do if he lived for 1,000 years. Seeing the guy pondering, he concludes, he would simply live and nothing else. On the first day, he'd jump for joy. And then? The guy is puzzled. How can one realize oneself as an immortal person then? After all, if humans are God's creations, why did he create them? There must be some meaning to it, right? The homeless man agrees. There must be, but he doesn't know it. And he doesn't know a single person who has realized themselves. Even those who entered history feel like something is missing. Take Hitler, for example. Even if one imagines that he genuinely believed in the ideas he propagated and wanted to change the course of history, did he realize himself? No. He spent his entire life becoming and embodying the caricature of a villain with a mustache. Did he realize the spark inside him, the one that made people stand up and follow him? He doesn't know if one can realize themselves within the framework of our world. So how can a person get to heaven if there's a devil inside them? The homeless man says that all human emotions are manifestations of fear. The part of a person that lives in that fear experiences eternal torment in hell, but the other part of them is love. Even in the Bible, it's written that God is love. To get to heaven, one must choose God within themselves. The guy asks, "Are you God?" The homeless man laughs. He's unpredictable. Sometimes he calls him a homeless man, and sometimes God. He's a human being, but in him, just like in everyone else, there's a bit of God, a bit of love. But surely God must have had a purpose for him. He can't just have left him to live forever and await the end of the world for no reason. There must be meaning in all of this. And the Jew retells Plato's words. Horses are born and die, but they're just embodiments of the idea of a horse, which lives forever. Likewise, people are born and die, but they're just embodiments of the idea of a human, which lives forever. It will live until the end of humanity. Their meeting has no symbolism. He can consider that he just met the idea of a human, which he's always met, even in the mirror. All of them are embodiments of the idea of a human. Tall, short, sad, happy, lazy, successful, full, gloomy, and open. They all think they are unique, but new ones come to replace them. Year after year, century after century, they were children yesterday, and today they are already old. But even so, new ones come to take their place, running, jumping, munching, and leaving in just the same way. A phone notification rings. A woman walks around his car in the parking lot. The guy introduces the homeless man, saying he's the one who has seen Jesus himself. The woman thinks he's mocking her. She drove across the entire city, and he's here with a vagabond. The guy tries to explain. Then a man with the same face as the homeless man approaches and yells at him. He's been looking for him for over an hour. Bags won't carry themselves. The homeless man leaves with him. The guy is bewildered. They are identical. The woman says he's gone mad and gets into her car, driving away. The guy gets into his car and looks in the mirror. The eyes of Ahasuerus are looking at him. The day comes when scientists in one of the biotechnology laboratories begin to clone famous personalities for very large fees, of course. In fact, many rich people would like to have a child of a genius like Vivaldi, Galileo, or Michelangelo. Soon, however, people decide to take a swing at something far more valuable, God himself. After Lucifer rebelled against the power of God in heaven, he was defeated by the archangel Michael, and flaming meteor was thrown into the underworld, where he had to remain in chains and punishing flames. Michael himself chained him to a rock and cried out to return as a humble angel, to which Lucifer replied that he would rather reign in hell than serve in paradise, and he threatened that he would return as ruler of the world. Over time, Lucifer was joined by numerous demons as he craved revenge. Meanwhile, on earth, Lucifer's disciples set up a temple at the site of his fall into the abyss, and they believe that one day he will return to rule on earth. Our time. Laura Milton, an American student, is trying to persuade her professor to accept her thesis on the theme that there are no evil or good spirits, but he refuses, offering to discuss the subject in an intimate setting. But now the girl refuses. At the same time, a rare exhibition begins at the museum, the Shroud of Turin, which contains the DNA of Jesus and is a record of the fact of his resurrection. Everything is on display. Laura enters the museum after receiving a pass, a badge from a priest she knows. Marconi explains that Christ was wrapped in the shroud the day he died, but that when he rose from the dead, his body shone so brightly that his imprint remained on the cloth. Thus, the shroud is a picture of Jesus. The priest then escorts Laura to the statue of the Archangel Michael, who has been brought to the museum to guard the shroud. The War of the Angels was the first war and the first evil, but Laura disagrees. Evil is not an external mystical force, it is a personality, and when trouble happens to loved ones, it is foolish to blame the devil. But Marconi is sure that only Michael stands between the devil and men. There are many prophecies that Lucifer will return, but the father hopes that he will not find a way out. The priest leaves to go about his business, and Laura gets comfortable and begins to draw. Suddenly, she hears her name, but no one is around. She calms down and continues to work. It's evening and the gallery is about to close. The last group of tourists enters the museum, and while the guard is distracted for a moment, a figure in a black cloak separates from the group and makes his way through a side door. Despite the late hour, Laura is still working when she thinks Lucifer's head on the statue is moving, followed by the cry of a raven. The girl walks to the window without noticing the sinister figure behind her, who pulls a sword from Michael's hand and walks away. Laura closes the window and gathers her things. The guard is ready to escort her out, but she refuses. She still has to see Padre Marconi. She goes to the chapel and sees a figure in black slaying the guard with a sword. The girl runs away in terror and hides in the confessional, watching as the woman with the sword breaks the glass over the shroud. Padre Marconi arrives at the noise and, in the name of Saint Michael, demands that the sacrilege cease, but the woman throws him aside and pierces him with her sword. Laura moves carelessly and the villain notices her. She orders her underlings to take the shroud and the girl, hoping that he might like her. The bandits leave while the mortally wounded priest summons the Archangel Michael to occupy his body and defeat his enemies. Immediately, a luminous whirlwind descends from the heavens and the father comes to life. He tries to catch up with the villains, but they drive away. The plot is moved to a private auction where one of the scientists, Dr. Laurent, explains that he has managed to create a procedure by which he can grow babies from the DNA of great men, thus resurrecting the most prominent figures in the history of mankind. And as proof, he presents the reincarnation of the great Vivaldi and his proud parents. The next lot, he presents the new Michelangelo Buonarroti, and the whole rises in a burst of delight. The bidding begins when a woman in black appears in the gallery and beckons to the doctor. He rushes to her call. The pair travel to the Devil's Castle, where the doctor sees the shroud. At last, Lucifer will have a decent home. Meanwhile, Laura is dragged into some room where several girls are already sitting in chains. All of them are horrified by what is happening and do not understand why they are there. A few men enter, take a blood test and photograph Laura, while Father Marconi, or rather the Archangel Michael in his body, makes his way to the guard room where two monks are watching the murder videos. Seeing the one who was murdered in front of them alive, they are astonished as he finds out where the keepers of the shroud were and how could they have allowed this to happen. It is explained to him that the cardinal responsible for everything is not himself at the moment. He sees secret cults and the devil's minions. And now he is in the asylum of Saint Michael. Archangel takes the car keys and drives to the cardinal's house, while the doctor isolates DNA from the blood traces on the shroud. The old cardinal meets Michael with a gun and, upon learning of what has happened, becomes enraged. He warned them, but looking into the man's eyes, he realizes he is not Marconi. The cardinal shows Michael Lucifer's castle and suggests that his minions intend to revive him. He reminds him the scriptures say that one day the devil will be freed from his chains and will rise from the underworld. Apparently the time has come. Two monsters are responsible for his release, a woman and an underground monster, but only Michael himself or God can set Lucifer free. The devil's minions have offered him the bodies of virgins for centuries to get a vessel for the devil, but human bodies are too weak. Although there was one woman in history who was able to bear and give birth to a son of God. and today science is ready to open the gates to the devil using Christ's DNA. Michael asks to be taken to the castle. Meanwhile, the girls try to devise an escape plan and share their experiences. It turns out that Laura's husband and son are dead. Instruments inform the doctor of a successful DNA extraction, and the walls in the underworld begin to crumble, heralding the devil's release, while the doctor informs Liz of a complete match of all the right parameters with Laura's body, and the women wait for the attendants to arrive and pounce on them. It seems that they will succeed, but another group rushes to the rescue and the girls are dragged into the laboratory. They are laid on tables, and despite desperate resistance, fertilized eggs are injected into their bodies. Liz convinces Laura to put up with it, for Lucifer is bound to like her. In the meantime, Cardinal escorts Michael to the entrance to the dungeon and warns of caution. A monster awaits ahead. At this time, the devil's minions gather in the hall with the well. Two impregnated girls are tied to a pillar in the center, and the monster who has come out takes them and leads them to the gateway to the underworld. The girls are put in an iron cage and lowered down, while Lucifer is already waiting for them. Sensing the approach of the possible Holy Mothers, he removes their collars and, transformed into a luminous stream, rushes towards them. The women are seized by the subterranean monsters and the stream enters one of them, but her body fails and she dies. Then the glowing worm enters Laura's body. Liz and the servants greet the living woman with delight. The choice is made. She is escorted into a glass cage where it is explained that her child will be the new Jesus. Meanwhile, Michael sneaks inside the castle and, having obtained a guard's uniform, finds the shroud and tries to find Laura. The doctor enters, but Michael rejects him and sets fire to the laboratory. He finds Laura, but the woman realizes it is not her longtime friend. She runs away. The archangel has to run after her. He manages to drag her into a storage room where he explains who he is and finds out exactly what was being done to the woman. The couple escapes when Liz is informed that the shroud is missing. She gives an order to detain Laura at all costs, and the guards rush in after her. Laura and Michael in the meantime try to hide from the underground monster in narrow passages, but it catches up with them and attacks the archangel. And while he wages a hard fight, Laura is grabbed by the guards. The enraged woman threatens Liz to kill herself and the child, and she orders her to be taken to a cell. Meanwhile, Michael is captured and put on a chain in the dungeon while Laura is tied to a bed. Liz is willing to do anything to keep the baby. After gathering all his strength, Michael breaks the chains and frees himself, while the castle guards search for the shroud hidden in the dungeon. The monster manages to see the archangel descend into the underworld. After reaching the bottom, he's attacked by the imprisoned souls and discovers that Lucifer has been freed and his sword is missing. Then the demon of greed, Mammon, flies to him and announces that they will soon close the gate and Michael will remain here instead of Lucifer, and he scoffs at his foolishness to come down in a mortal body. The archangel is chained to the rock with Lucifer's sword. Laura meanwhile sees her child in an ultrasound, and he suddenly calls out her name. The woman wakes up terrified and sees Liz nearby, who finds out what Lucifer told her, and then tells the story of a brave warrior and a tyrant who were equals. But the tyrant wanted the warrior to be his slave, but he refused, and soon he would rise up and join the fight. Laura speaks unflatteringly of the demon, for which she is slapped in the face, after which Liz explains the transformation happening to her body by the need to make it comfortable for the divine child. But the woman doesn't want to accept her imposed role as the mother of an incomprehensible creature. Meanwhile, the people who were given to Lucifer come to Michael, pronouncing the oath, "Saved one, saved all," and questioning him about his origins. Discovering that it is Michael himself, they demand proof, but Michael needs a sword. At this point, they are attacked by demons. The men flee. Laura is again visited by the worm Lucifer, who goes inside her. He speaks to her and convinces her to give birth to the baby he wants, after which she can do what she wants, even kill Liz. The woman calms down and sees herself with the baby in her arms, but one day she frees herself and terribly mutilates the guards and escapes from the ward. When she sees the consequences of her actions, she is horrified. What has been done to her? She manages to make her way to a warehouse, and after locking herself inside, she drinks a canister of chlorine. Liz finds it and promises that soon Lucifer will consume her completely and then she will find peace. But then Laura suddenly gains unprecedented strength, grabs the hated Liz and spews the contents of her stomach on her. From Laura's womb, Lucifer himself begins to speak to Liz and demands that the woman be killed as soon as he is born, and to destroy all who knows of what is happening. Laura is imprisoned in a glass sarcophagus to prevent any further attempts to kill the child, and Lucifer returns to the underworld where he sees Michael and taunts him. He offers an alliance that no one will be able to defeat, but the archangel refuses to support the rebel. He thanks Michael for his new home, the body of Jesus himself, which will be his own. Lucifer flies away, and the archangel suddenly realizes this is not at all what he thought. It is not the devil but God who has chosen Laura. She will give birth to Christ, not the devil's vessel. He asks the people to bring his sword, but the demons are close and the sword is heavy. But two men risk their lives to bring the weapon, and Michael is set free. He dispels the demons and promises to return for his saviors. Michael returns to Earth and finds the shroud. Then he goes to Laura's sarcophagus. He is horrified to see her change and tries to tell her that this child is not evil at all. It is he who will defeat the devil. But Laura gets out and throws Michael away. Then she stands over him and tells him that the waters are already breaking. Searing jets pour out on the archangel and he screams in pain. Losing his strength, Laura places Michael in her lap and demands that he kneel. He refuses and the woman sinks her fingers into his neck. With the last of his strength, Michael promises that the devil will not be able to control the child. He is the one who will defeat Lucifer because the blood of Christ does not flow and good is always stronger than evil. Enraged, Laura throws Michael aside and begins to destroy everything around her. But then the birth begins. The devil's followers gather in the castle courtyard while Liz takes the born baby away. Laura is thrown down the well and the monster takes a chain with a sharp tip and goes into the courtyard. Liz brings the baby out and shows it to the assembled people. The end of God's tyranny has come. She orders the people to kneel and calls upon Lucifer to receive the baptism of blood. At the same moment, the monster begins to spin his terrible weapon, crushing everyone in the courtyard. At this time, Michael comes to his senses and goes out into the yard as the doctor kisses the baby and dies under the blows. Liz carries the baby away, and Michael finds Laura, who has managed to hold onto the edge of the well, and pulls her out. The pair catch up with Liz's car, and while Laura picks up her baby, Michael calls him the God who chose his mother. He asks the woman to find the cardinal and goes to the well himself. He seals the entrance to the underworld where all the demons of hell have rushed, but the monster rejects him and opens the gates again. And then Michael detonates the explosives he set earlier. The castle explodes to the great joy of the cardinal. A bit later, the cardinal and Laura with the child in her arms come to the temple and return the shroud. And Michael descends into the underworld and frees the people who believed in him. After a while, Liz observes Cardinal and Laura with a grown boy walking through the woods, and she calls the baby Lucifer. And he turns around and shows a dark jet showing out of his nose. Then he turns away. Pretty unusual film which raises the themes of the struggle between good and evil, but viewed through the prism of the scientific achievements of our time. And some doubts arise as to whether man truly understands what he is really doing. One day, the ruler of the Murakami province receives a warning from a neighboring feudal lord who has decided to seize a mountain to build a castle there. However, Lord Murakami orders the messenger to be killed and prepares to defend the village. Sometime later, the mountain is besieged by the neighbor's army. Confident in victory and mocking the lord, whose face is hidden behind a mask, he sends his soldiers into battle, but the small group led by the lord standing before them extends their hands forward and the entire army falls, destroyed by an unknown weapon that literally pierces their bodies. Present day. At a university, a group of students studying paranormal abilities gathers. One of them, Yoji Minami Maru, nicknamed Nanmaru, possesses a small supernatural power, the ability to create tiny holes in everything, which he demonstrates on a stack of paper. The young people are impressed by his skill, but Nanmaru himself doesn't consider it useful since he can't even find a job. Just then he receives a summons from Professor Murakami and heads to the Department of History and Folklore, where he meets lecturer Emi, who is worried about the professor's absence. Murakami had gone on a research trip and disappeared. The woman is surprised by the boy's last name and asks about his family, but he can't recall anything of interest. Meanwhile, in the town of Marukawa, located on Mount Murakami, a girl named Sachiko wakes up from a nightmare. Her grandmother brings her milk and tries to calm her down. Back at the Paranormal Enthusiasts Club, there's a disagreement, and one of the boys remarks on the uselessness of Nanmaru's ability. The boy gets upset and recalls how his grandfather taught him to punch tiny holes in objects by shouting, believing his grandson was special. At this moment, he is found by student Emi, Tagai. The thing is, Emi, while researching his genealogy, discovered a common ancestor in the boy's family and the professor's. She asked Nanmaru to help search for him, as the last case Murakami studied was the murder of their ancestor. The boy's parents can't help since their family moved away from there a long time ago. In the morning, they show him a model of the village made by Tagai, and Emi tells an ancient legend in which Nanmaru's ancestor betrayed Lord Murakami, leading to his death in battle. However, the professor found a written account that during the battle, all the enemies perished, with only one person on Murakami's side. And 10 days later, a festival took place on this spot, which would be very strange if the residents had betrayed and killed their lord. Tagai draws everyone's attention to the shape of the mountains around the village, as if they were artificially created. But who could have done such a thing back then? Later, Nanmaru demonstrates his ability to his new friends, which greatly impresses them. Meanwhile, in the town of Marukawa, an official notices a strange black circle on a window pane. He reaches out, and his hand seems to be cut off, and then the man's head splits, as if struck by a spherical object. At the university, Emi asks Nanmaru to show his ability and tells him that the professor also learned to punch holes in objects before he disappeared. However, they were much larger. At this point, the boy suggests that the ability might have come from their common ancestor. At that moment, everyone hears the news about the murder of the official in Marukawa. Nanmaru suggests they search for the professor themselves. The action returns to medieval times. Lord Murakami vows not to let anyone invade his lands. His fingers begin to extend, and strange round marks appear on his wrists. Present day. The students, along with Emi, arrive in Marukawa and begin searching for the professor, but no one has seen him. However, the young people find armor with round holes in the local museum, and on the local lord's banner, they notice the image of a magpie, a human hand, and a circle, the meaning of which no one knows. They discover that after Minamimara's death, his lord gave his youngest son to his family so the lineage would not die out. So Nanmaru is a descendant of the lord himself. They question people on the street, but no one has seen the professor. Soon the students find the building where the murder occurred and for the first time wonder if Nanmaru's ability could punch through window glass. At a cafe, the group learns about the upcoming Tanabata festival. The men sitting at a nearby table suddenly mention that the professor's presence will make the festival unforgettable and lead to the lord's revival. Tagai asks questions, but the men pretend to know nothing about the professor. Then they hear Nanmaru's name and become excited. Later, the friends joke about how the locals consider Nanmaru to be the lord and practically worship him. Emi reminds them that Tanabata is Japan's Day of Lovers, celebrated on July 7th. On this night, the stars Vega in the constellation Lyra and Altair in the constellation Aquila, separated by the Milky Way, come closest, and the magpie lays a bridge between them. But what do these facts reveal? The next day, the group goes to the mountain where the festival will take place and finds 7 strangely shaped stones standing in the middle of a clearing. Later, Sachiko visits Nanmaru, wanting to see the boy's abilities. He punches a can, but it seems that the girl expected something different. In the evening, Emi suggests returning to Tokyo because she doesn't trust the locals. Meanwhile, the hotel owner makes a phone call, reporting that Nanmaru can make holes in objects. The next day, a young man whom Sachiko calls her brother and clearly fears enters her home, but the grandmother asks him to leave and never return. Nanmaru meanwhile goes to the cafe, and the owner reminds him that this village is his real home. The boy asks Sachiko to explain her comment about the man who can achieve, and she arranges to meet him. In the evening, the girl explains that in the town, 2 types of people with superpowers are born: achievers and window openers. There are only 5 of the former, including Nanmaru, but the latter are those worthy of becoming priests of Mount Murakami. The boy doesn't understand what's so exciting about this since the hole is so small, but the girl abruptly cuts him off. She just wants to live a normal life. After all, she is a window opener. Meanwhile, Sachiko's brother Takashi is walking among people and encounters some local guys. Emi notices a strange glow over the mountain. She and Tagai head there and see a group of people in white robes, dancing with torches in a clearing, summoning someone. Meanwhile, the guys beat Takashi and, pulling off his hat, see a stone embedded in his forehead. They leave him on the road. Emi and Tagai sneak closer to the dancers and see a masked man performing some kind of ritual. After the people leave, the pair approach the stones and realize there are only 6. It means that each day of the festival, 1 stone will disappear. At this moment, Takashi raises his hands and his attackers lose their legs. Another group of people in white arrives at the mountain. Meanwhile, a newspaper article is published about the outrage of local residents protesting the construction of a golf course on the mountain's peak, as this place is sacred to them. At this time, the people in white capture Emi and Tagai, but she shouts the professor's name, and one of the men uncovers his face. It turns out to be the village head, who led the Tanabata ritual passed down through generations in the Murakami family. They apologize and ask her to describe what she saw. Emi recounts the first group that had already been there. Returning to town, she asks the students to leave while she stays to find the professor, as she is sure he is alive. In the morning, Nanmaru says goodbye to Sachiko and exchanges emails with her. Later, Emi sees the students off just as Takashi arrives at the hotel and realizes that the boy has left. Noticing that the hotel owner is making a call, he smashes the phone. He finds out the boy's address in Tokyo and leaves. He later finds Nanmaru at the club and begins teaching him how to use his power. He raises his hands and a sphere grows between his palms, which he calls a sphere beyond reality. It can easily dismember a person or another object. Nanmaru follows his advice and creates his first sphere. Seeing its size, Takashi runs for water and, trying to pour it over the sphere, breaks the bucket. He then convinces the boy that they are chosen. All of this is witnessed by Nanmaru's classmate, Aki. Later, Nanmaru writes to Sachiko, and she advises him to stay away from her brother. At the cafe in Marakawa, unknown men in black suits arrive, which the owner immediately reports to the town leader. He orders everyone to keep their mouths shut. On the same day, the professor calls Emi, apologizes, and tells her that his window has opened. He assures her that he didn't kill anyone and says goodbye to her. In Tokyo, a meeting takes place with a politician who wants to run for a higher office. While he is speaking to the assembled crowd, a man with a masked face enters the university building and places his long-fingered hands against the wall. Suddenly, a huge black sphere appears on stage, right in front of the politician. The man reaches out to it, and his body is immediately sliced in half. Meanwhile, Emi returns to Tokyo, and Nanmaru demonstrates his new abilities, which frightens his friends. After all, this is how the murder in Marakawa happened. That night, Sachiko visits her grandfather, who has round marks on his arms and a stone grows in his forehead. Meanwhile, the person who ordered the politician's murder, known as the Baron, watches the footage of the event and praises his subordinate for coming up with such a way to dispose of an undesirable person, but the murder in Marakawa was unnecessary. Therefore, he needs someone more obedient. That morning, Takashi comes to Nanmaru again to suggest that he participate in a project to train people in superpowers. A significant number of people attend this paid seminar. Under Takashi's guidance, Nanmaru demonstrates his power by smashing a metal statue. This causes unprecedented excitement among the audience. Nanmaru himself is delighted with the fee he received, unaware that Takashi and his accomplice, host Yokihara, earned hundreds of times more. The guys discuss Nanmaru's foolishness, not noticing that Aki is recording their conversation. That evening, the Baron is informed that one of the achievers lives in Tokyo. Meanwhile, Nanmaru notices a strange growth on his forehead. At the same time, Emi continues studying the professor's papers and suddenly seems to see him. Murakami reminds her that Tanabata was first celebrated on April 29th, and so it has always been, but it's already May now. Emi rushes to check the records and realizes that the dates have changed. In the Western Gregorian calendar, they coincide, including the very first, but this calendar was only introduced in 1582. And only in Catholic countries, but how could it have appeared in Marakawa? Meanwhile, Nanmaru continues participating in seminars, supposedly teaching people superpowers. The boy tries to explain that not everyone can do this, but no one believes him. Then Aki lets him listen to the recording she made. Nanmaru refuses to participate in the seminars, explaining that his power is not meant for deceit. Meanwhile, in Marakawa, Sachiko meets a masked man at her mother's grave, whom she calls Lord Yoriyuki Murakami. At the evening gathering, the town leader reports to Sachiko's grandfather about a group of outsiders looking for achievers in their town. He reminds them of the rules: no one should know the village's secret. The next day, Yoriyuki is brought to the Baron. The achiever demands that the village be left alone, but the Baron claps his hands and 4 armed men run out of the neighboring rooms. However, Yoriyuki is much faster, and all fall with pierced heads. He agrees to work temporarily for the Baron and removes the mask from his face. The Baron is horrified to see a completely inhuman face. Meanwhile, Nanmaru continues to look for a job where he could properly use his power. Suddenly, he hears calls for help. Passers-by have found a child in a locked car. They locate the mother, but she has lost her keys and cannot open the vehicle. Seeing the boy losing consciousness from the heat, Nanmaru uses his powers to smash the car's window. People are impressed, and the mother thanks the savior. Later, he sees a news report about the incident, but these same shots catch the attention of Takashi in Yokihara. They begin vandalizing the signs of establishments with problems. TV reports about them start to appear, raising social issues. Everyone discusses the unknown boy, whom they nickname Chisel. The police start an investigation. The Baron is displeased with the commotion, but Yoriyuki assures him that he knows who is responsible. Meanwhile, in Marikawa, people believe that Takashi is behind all this. Sachiko's grandfather and the professor ask the girl to go to Tokyo. Following his friend's advice, Nanmaru decides to become a janitor, thinking he could simply destroy the trash. However, the group soon notices that the mark on his forehead grows with each use of his power. One day, Sachiko arrives in Tokyo. She confesses to Emi that the town lied. The professor was there all along. Now he hands his assistant a letter of apology through Sachiko. She explains that all the town's residents have been having nightmares. Their conversation is interrupted by Nanmaru's arrival. The girl notices the mark on his forehead, but the boy doesn't understand her hints. He points out the place where Takashi might be. At another seminar where Takashi continues to deceive people, a delegation from the town arrives and demands that these activities stop. Takashi, pointing at Nanmaru, accuses the boy of wanting to monopolize the gift, and no matter how much Nanmaru yells trying to explain the truth, people don't listen. Then Sachiko steps forward. She accuses her brother of lying and calls him a killer. Takashi raises his hands as if preparing to create a sphere, but at that moment a loud pop is heard and a huge hole appears in the window. Yoriyuki, standing below, calls Takashi to him and the latter runs down. He orders Takashi to stop deceiving people, but the seminar attendees don't want that, so Yoriyuki instantly creates a massive sphere and blows off part of the roof. He explains that no one can develop this gift, even after thousands of years of training, and shows his hands. But upon noticing Nanmaru, he suddenly declares that the boy must be erased. Sachiko shields him with her body, and the blow strikes the ground. Later, the townspeople explain to Nanmaru that Yoriyuki Murakami would have been the ruler of the settlement in ancient times. Now he eliminates disobedient telekinetics. That's why he took Takashi away. Uncontrolled power is a threat to the village's existence. Nanmaru doesn't understand. Hasn't anyone ever used the gift for good? But he is abruptly cut off. Later, Sachiko and Nanmaru have dinner together, and he shows her Tokyo at night. Nanmaru receives his first job order for trash removal. That night, Sachiko asks for permission to stay with him. She explains that the village residents fear the dark side of the gift and shows Nanmaru her back, scarred and disfigured. The girl also shows him a family photo that includes Yoriyuki, who once looked like a normal person and loved her mother. However, according to village customs, the girl was married off to another. Her father couldn't accept that his children exhibited a weak power, constantly harassing his son and forcing him to train. Her mother, tired of the constant strife, asked Yoriyuki, who had become the mountain's priest, for help. He began training Takashi, who eventually created his first sphere. The boy started visiting the priest frequently, which didn't please his father. After gaining his gift, Takashi became aggressive and took out his anger on his little sister. When everyone was on the verge of breaking down, Sachiko began having dreams. One day she overheard an argument between her father and Takashi in the garden and caught her brother standing over her father's bloodied body. Takashi insisted he didn't do it, but their mother expelled him from the house. The grandfather and the village residents covered up the incident. One day her mother went to the mountain, asking the girl to bring Yoriyuki, who had already lost his human form. On the way she talked about her nightmares, but he confessed that everyone saw them. They reached the mountain, where her mother left this world. Afterward, Yoriyuki left the village, only returning when he learned that a developer wanted to desecrate the mountain. Takashi wouldn't have been able to do it, being too small-minded and self-centered. She's glad that Nanmaru sees the gift in a positive light. Meanwhile, the police start investigating the disappearance of their officers. One detective constantly recalls the incident on stage and meets Aki, who insists that the spatial sphere is no mere trick. Suddenly, Nanmaru suggests to his friends that they shut down the project, believing the gift is too great for mere trash removal. Later he goes to see Emmi, who tells him that she found a few strange phrases about the solar years in the professor's letter. She compared the facts and realized that the village used a solar, not a Gregorian, calendar. During the festival, the solstice was always present. Thus, the Tanabata festival lasted 3 days before the solstice, 1 day during it, and 3 days after. Namaru later takes a job with a cleaning company. Meanwhile, Aki suggests that the detective team up with her to investigate the unexplained incidents. That night, Namaru has his first nightmare, where he falls into a void. Suddenly, he hears Sachiko screaming, begging him not to approach the other side. Ahead, he sees an opening door and wakes up. The next day, a car, a boat, and a plane disappear in the city. Aki and the detective track down Yoriyuki, who arrives to meet Takashi and warn him about the danger of opening windows. However, Aki and the detective are caught by the Baron's men. Yoriyuki then demonstrates the disappearance of a prominent politician right at the door of a nearby building. The guards drag in the bound Aki and the detective, but Yoriyuki leaves, not considering them important. Meanwhile, Nanmaru starts work, clearing old items from an office. Suddenly, he realizes that these items were precious to someone and have a history. He runs to the roof where the others are working and asks for permission to leave some things in the building. His co-worker agrees and begins asking Nanmaru about his abilities. At that moment, they see a massive sphere floating above the city. The next moment, it bursts and erases several buildings. It turns out Yoriyuki is doing this a few blocks away. Seeing the explosion, people mistake it for a terrorist attack. Panic ensues. Namaru runs with everyone else and suddenly finds himself in a field strewn with the bodies of medieval warriors. But before he can be scared, he returns to his time. Yoriyuki tells Takashi that he will soon put an end to the nightmares. Meanwhile, in the village, Sachiko hears an announcement about the disappearance of 200 people in the destroyed buildings. Her grandmother doesn't believe Yoriyuki did it. After all, he was the protector of the people, but many eyewitnesses saw the massive black sphere and no one else possesses such power. Sachiko asks her mother for help. Namaru continues having nightmares, where Sachiko begs him not to approach the windows or else he will find himself on the other side. The next day, the government declares a quarantine and asks everyone to stay home. Meanwhile, in the village, people discuss the events, not believing that their Yoriyuki could have done such a thing. Meanwhile, the detective regains consciousness and finds that they are in some basement. Sachiko's grandfather contacts Emi, after which she decides to go to Markawa. Namaru finds Takashi in his room. He accuses him of killing people, but Takashi explains that Yoriyuki wants to end the nightmares. He suddenly asks the boy to do him a favor and convey his apologies to Sachiko. Namaru admits that his sister doesn't consider him a killer, and that turns out to be the most important thing for him. At the same time, Yoriyuki decides to break off the deal with the Baron and informs his bodyguard. Before leaving, Takashi gives Nanmaru a piece of paper with the address and plan of the place where Aki and the detective are being held. He goes there and arrives just as one of the bodyguards forces the detective to shoot Aki. But then the Baron calls, ordering him to come immediately. Nanmaru distracts the remaining guard by creating a sphere and tries to free the captives. However, there is another guard who points a weapon at him. The detective tries to interfere and the gun falls, wounding the guard. The men struggle and Nanmaru creates a sphere, preparing to send it at the guard. But Aki screams, the boy comes to his senses and he breaks through the wall. He frees the captives and leads them out. Later, he notices that the stone in his forehead has grown and realizes that he almost killed someone recently. Meanwhile, Yoriyuki tells the Baron that he needs to experiment with the sphere's precision and flight range. After he leaves, the Baron realizes the danger of the monster and plans to go to the Prime Minister. But at that moment, the city center is engulfed by a giant sphere and a massive hole in the ground appears where the building stood. The next day, all channels broadcast news of the deaths of people in the newly formed craters. The government urges residents to stay home. However, Namaru goes to meet his friends, who are joined by Aki. Namaru recalls Yoriyuki's words about getting rid of the nightmare and promises to go all the way to find out what he meant. Gathering together, the group heads to Markawa, where they are met by Sachiko and a delegation of locals. Namaru recounts Yoriyuki's words about the nightmares, but none of the locals hurry to explain. Emi then sternly urges them to avoid another incident with the loss of lives. She wants to know what the windows are, why the Tanabata festival is needed, and what the role of the mountain priest is. However, the villagers admit that they don't understand Yoriyuki's plan. Namaru loses his temper. He respects the town's customs, but the power of the mountain kills, and Yoriyuki is a killer. The town leader promises to introduce the group to the master, Sachiko's grandfather. He also plans to invite Professor Murakami to the meeting. In the morning, Yoriyuki and Takashi arrive at the master's estate. The maid greets the guests and rushes to warn the master of the unexpected visitors. The old man immediately accuses Yoriyuki of killing the official, but Yoriyuki reminds him that the man wanted to destroy the sacred mountain by turning it into a golf course. Yoriyuki has found answers to his questions and is ready to break the rules. The pair are about to leave, but suddenly the visitor stops. He senses armed men hiding in the yard and prepares to fight. The Baron's men open fire, but the bullets don't touch Yoriyuki. The maid rushes to her master. Meanwhile, Nanmaru's group walks along the road leading to the estate. Sachiko tells Nanmaru that the locals fear him. Deep down, they are vassals. The town leader thanks Tagai for the model of their area, saying the professor told him it helped solve the problem. At this time, in the master's house, Yoriyuki distributes the exits to attack the enemy from different sides. Meanwhile, soldiers burst into the master's bedroom and open fire. Yoriyuki tears them apart with a sphere. Namaru's friends hear the shots and run to the estate. The Baron's assistant brings in reserve troops and orders the estate to be surrounded. Yoriyuki and Takashi are caught in a circle. They stand back to back, grow spheres, and kill the soldiers. Yoriyuki creates a whole bunch of spheres. One of the soldiers, dying, shoots Takashi. When Nanmaru's group arrives at the estate, they find a pile of bodies. The old master, dying, orders them to stop Yoriyuki. Namaru and Sachiko step into the yard as the Baron's men leave the estate. Yoriyuki is leading the wounded Takashi along a forest path, but the boy is getting worse. Eventually, he falls and dies. Namaru and Sachiko also find the forest path and soon see Takashi's body. Sachiko takes her brother's death hard. Meanwhile, Emi finds a handprint on the door with long fingers, belonging, according to legend, to the monster Kasasagi. Later, the group returns to the town, where they are unexpectedly stopped by Sachiko's grandmother, who asks Nanmaru to go with her, as she received an order from the new master, Professor Murakami, to protect the boy. He ends up at Sachiko's house. In the evening, the young people meet on the veranda. Sachiko asks him to be careful and offers sweet sake, which helps with nightmares. She believes that the dead turn into stars in the sky. The distance between them is vast. No matter how much you scream, no one will hear you, and the loneliest thing is your own death when you are the only one stepping out of the window. The girl talks about her nightmares where she is searching for someone. Unexpectedly, she finds herself on a mountain where she feels the presence of someone beyond the Milky Way, and they extend a hand to her. Namaru grabs her hand and confesses that Takashi regretted his behavior. Sachiko, however, hopes that her brother did not go into the darkness alone. That night, Emi struggles to sleep, replaying everything that happened in her mind. The next day, despite the police's order to stay indoors, the men of Marakawa arrange a meeting, not noticing that Aki is recording their conversation, which he later shows to Emi. The friends discover that there are no news reports anywhere about the massacre in the town and decide to go to the meeting. Meanwhile, the police knock on Sachiko's grandmother's door, searching for Nanmaru, but the girl leads him out through the back door. However, Nanmaru is convinced that the police are looking for Yoriyuki. In the evening, the residents on their way to the meeting are stopped by the police. A confrontation ensues, which Emi and her students observe. Then the Baron's men arrive, also seeking to capture Yoriyuki, but the residents refuse to hand over their priest. The Baron's assistant fires a shot over their heads, claiming that Yoriyuki possesses a terrifying power that could destroy the planet. At this point, Nanmaru intervenes, suggesting they meet with Yoriyuki first to let him explain his actions. When people start shouting again, he creates a sphere. Nanmaru admits that he doesn't know why he has such abilities, but there can be no talk of betrayal by the town. Then Professor Murakami steps out from the crowd. Emi is horrified to see the enormous stone in his forehead and faints. Namaru is at a city council meeting. He asks them to agree that he will convince Yoriyuki to talk to the police and the Baron's men. Guards will wait for him on the mountain to persuade him to leave the town without harming its residents. Later, he informs his friends that the professor wants to meet with them in his laboratory. In the morning, the team goes to Murakami. They gather around the model, and the professor begins his explanation. The village festival was established and held for 7 days during Tanabata, the summer solstice. In Chinese history, from which this festival originated, it symbolized a magpie that bridged the Milky Way. It was also on the Lord's flag, but it turns out that magpies didn't exist in Japan at that time, so it must have been something similar. The professor asks Tagai to help him, smears his hand with ink, and asks him to make a handprint. He then shows Yoriyuki's handprint left at the master's estate and aligns them in a specific order. The group immediately recalls the Lord's emblem in the Marakawa Museum. It looks as though a long-fingered hand is passing a sphere to a human hand. The professor asks them to look at the model. Tagai immediately notices that the mountains seem artificial and that Tanabata takes place on the solstice days when a second sunset can be seen. Murakami simulates the sunset during the solstice, and the group is surprised to see 2 hands and a black sphere between them in the mountainous landscape. The professor marvels at the unknown master's creation, an enormous earth sculpture spanning several kilometers. One might consider that it was created by the Kasasagi, who appeared in this area, perhaps from the sky. How would people have reacted to this? After all, according to the peasants' beliefs, the entire land was inhabited by gods, and they couldn't always distinguish between good and evil. The Kasasagi, who became gods to them, began visiting this planet regularly, as mentioned in many tales and legends. And if you look at Mount Murakami, you can see that it resembles a helicopter landing pad, so the festival torches served as guiding lights. The festival itself began as a ceremony to welcome the gods during the summer solstice, but at some point, the Kasasagi stopped appearing. Yet for thousands of years, people continued to meet them, even though they never came. However, the town became trapped in its beliefs. Invisible chains keep the initiates in one place. Fear and loneliness are what lie beyond the window, and the window openers have to wait for the Kasasagi. The professor and Sachiko are among those the visitors learned to reach thousands of years ago, using their minds. The large flag on the mountain most likely symbolizes loyalty and a reminder that one should not leave this earth. For this, fear is instilled in the window openers. That's why the locals have protected this mountain for every era. It's hard to believe, but it's unknown whether the Kasasagi will ever return. They may have died long ago. The next morning, the guards on the mountain come out for breakfast, and later Emi and her students arrive. The professor is concerned about their well-being and suggests they all go to the city, but Nanmaru refuses. He feels obligated to be the first to meet Yoriyuki. Murakami supports his decision, as the townspeople need protection. Each generation of priests has ingrained the sacred duty into their minds, but the professor is the only one who thought to create a model and can now visually show people what is really happening here. They light bonfires to show Yoriyuki that there are people here. After all, he most likely wants to destroy the mountain. That would end everything, but the people are becoming hostages. In the evening, the students and Nanmaru go on watch. The boy asks Sachiko about her dreams and suggests they leave this place to start a new life. Moreover, he feels something for her. At that moment, the Baron's men appear. They haven't waited for Yoriyuki and demand to know where he is, otherwise they'll start killing the townspeople. The professor is outraged and even creates a sphere, but then one of the Baron's soldiers shoots his comrades and removes his helmet, revealing himself to be Yoriyuki. Those who haven't seen his form before scream in fear. The Baron's assistant tries to shoot him and immediately dies from a sphere. Yoriyuki admits that he always imagined the black sphere as a trash chute. He simply pushed those who posed a threat to the village into it. But now, he doubts that. The ancestors, the Kasasagi, might have contacted their descendants many times, but most of them didn't develop the ability to leave with them unharmed. He believes that his ancestors were from other stars. They possessed knowledge and logic foreign to Earthlings. But what if it's not a window but a gate? And by entering the sphere, you can be transported to the ancestors' planet? That's why he changed his plans. At that moment, people see a huge black sphere above their heads. Yoriyuki announces that he intends to leave with the Kasasagi. Sachiko suddenly asks him to take her with him. The dark world is calling to her, and she wants to find peace. Nanmaru reminds her of her dreams. The girl reaches out, and through the darkness, she sees an inhuman hand beckoning her from another reality. But just as she is about to grasp it, Nanmaru grabs her wrist. Yoriyuki shakes his head. Nanmaru will never understand the feelings of the window openers. The boy agrees, but he doesn't like that the girl is ready to go into the afterlife without experiencing even a small part of this vast world. Here there is wisdom, mistakes, and attempts to start over. The world is thousands of years old, and compared to that, all superpowers are insignificant. He doesn't want her to leave and asks her to stay. The girl agrees. She remembers how her mother once left for the sphere. Yoriyuki also recalls that moment and promises to wait for her. The sphere begins to grow, and Nanmaru orders everyone to run. The people rush down the mountain while Yoriyuki stands under the sphere, waiting for it to consume him. A massive explosion occurs. Nanmaru's team manages to take cover in the forest, and the town's electricity goes out. Time passes. Tagai enrolls in graduate school. Emi and Murakami resign from the department and now live together in Marikawa. Aki has become an independent internet journalist and now lives with the former policeman. The people of Marikawa quickly reconstructed the area where the mountain once stood. Nanmaru has opened a company where people exchange items without using money. It's strange but highly successful. He no longer uses his abilities, which means his appearance will remain unchanged. One day he goes to Marikawa, where a festival is scheduled to take place in the evening. After all, the festival continues in the hope that someone will come from the Milky Way, and Sachiko lives in her house, always waiting for Nanmaru. The series is based on the manga by Hitoshi Iwaki, the author of the famous Parasite. While the middle of the plot may drag a bit, the finale ties everything together and thoroughly explains the events on screen, which is a rare feat in modern cinema.